Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto married both Yamato and Hiyori to unite the clans of Wano under his rule? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger from the Maelstrom. The first thing he knew was pain. It was a dull, thrumming ache that started behind his eyes and spread through every sinew, every bone, until it settled deep in the marrow. It was the pain of a body pushed beyond its limits and then some, the price of a power that could level mountains and boil seas. He had paid that price before, but never like this. This was different. This was the agony of being unmade and put back together again, wrong. The second thing was the sound. The rhythmic crash and hiss of water against sand. It was a peaceful sound, a lullaby for a world at rest. It was a sound so alien to the screaming chaos of his last memory that it felt like a lie. He remembered a fist the size of a meteor, a vortex of violet and black energy that tore at the fabric of reality. And Kurama's final, desperate roar, a sound of both fury and farewell. He remembered shoving every last scrap of his own energy into a spiraling sphere of golden light, a sun meant to hold back the end of the world. Then, nothing. Just the tearing, the shredding, the fall through an endless, screaming void. Naruto Uzumaki's eyes cracked open. The sky was a shade of blue he'd never seen before, a deep, impossible sapphire unflecked by a single cloud. He was lying on his side on a beach of fine, white sand. A few feet away, the turquoise water foamed gently, the tide lick king at the tattered remains of his black trousers. His right arm was gone from the elbow down, a memory he had grown accustomed to, the stump wrapped in old, familiar bandages. His left arm was wrong. The skin was a latticework of angry red scars and half-healed burns, a testament to the raw power he had tried to contain. His signature orange jacket was gone, torn to shreds in that final, desperate exchange. All he had left were the ragged pants and the mesh armor underneath, which was itself torn in a dozen places. He pushed himself up with his left hand, his muscles screaming in protest. The world tilted violently, and he squeezed his eyes shut against a wave of nausea. He was drained, not just tired, not just chakra depleted. He was empty. He tried to reach for the vast, warm presence that had been his constant companion since birth, the roaring sun of the nine tails chakra that lived in his gut. There was nothing, just a hollow echo, a cold and silent space where a raging inferno should have been. Kurama was gone. The finality of it hit him harder than any physical blow. It wasn't the shock of a sudden death, it was the chilling silence after a lifetime of noise. He had known the cost. Kurama had told him what Baryon mode would demand of them. One of them would not walk away. In the end, the old fox had lied, shouldering the entire burden himself to save his jailer, his partner, his friend. A lump formed in Naruto's throat, a grief so profound it stole the air from his lungs. He was alone, truly, utterly alone. He staggered to his feet, his legs trembling like a newborn foal's. He scanned the horizon. The beach curved away in both directions, meeting a line of jagged, black cliffs overgrown with stout, twisted pine trees. The interior of the island, or continent, he couldn't tell, rose into steep, mist-shrouded mountains that looked like they had been painted by an artist with a flair for the dramatic. There were no signs of civilization. No roads, no buildings, no distant curl of smoke. He was lost, shipwrecked in a world that felt both beautiful and deeply, fundamentally wrong. He started walking, his bare feet sinking into the cool sand. He had no destination, no plan. He just knew he couldn't stay still. To stay still was to let the grief and the emptiness consume him. He followed the curve of the beach, the rhythmic crash of the waves a lonely companion. He walked for what felt like hours, the sun climbing high into the unfamiliar sky. Thirst began to claw at his throat, and the dull ache in his body sharpened into a throbbing agony. He was vulnerable, more vulnerable than he had been since he was a child. Without Kurama's regenerative abilities, his wounds were just wounds, and his stamina was finite. He found a stream cutting through the beach, its water clear and cold as it flowed from the dense forest. He fell to his knees and drank deeply, the water a balm on his parched throat. He splashed it on his face, trying to wash away the pee. phantom feeling of heat and tearing energy. As he knelt there, he caught his reflection in the water. The face that stared back was his, but it was older, harder. The boyish roundness was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of a man who had seen too much. His blonde hair was longer, matted with salt and sand. But it was his eyes that held him. They were the same deep blue, but the fire in them, the irrepressible, idiotic optimism that had defined him, was banked low, little more than embers. In its place was a profound weariness, the look of a soldier who had won the war but lost everything in the process. He was 20 years old and felt 1,000. A sound broke the silence. The snap of a twig, not far away. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his body moving with an instinct born of 1,000 battles. He dropped into a low crouch, his senses flaring. He couldn't feel chakra signatures, another part of him that felt broken, but his ears, his nose, his eyes, they were all honed to a razor's edge. He heard the rustle of clothing, the soft thud of footsteps. More than one. They were trying to be quiet, but to him, they sounded like a herd of elephants. 4 figures emerged from the treeline where the forest met the sand. They were dressed in strange, flowing robes, kimonos, he recognized, but more ornate and battle-worn than any he had seen. Each of them carried a sword at their hip, the long, curved blade of a katana. Their hair was tied up in elaborate topknots, a style he'd only seen in historical scrolls. They were samurai. Their eyes widened as they saw him. They took in his strange clothes, his sun-bright hair, and his foreign features. He was an outsider, an unknown variable in a land that, he would soon learn, did not welcome such things. Their hands drifted to the hilts of their swords. Their faces a mixture of suspicion and aggression. "Who are you?" The leader, a grim-faced man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, demanded. His voice was rough, his words clipped. The language was familiar, yet the dialect was thick, antiquated. Naruto slowly raised his left hand, palm open, a universal sign of peace. "I mean you no harm," he said, his own voice raspy from disuse. "My name is Naruto. I'm lost." The samurai exchanged uneasy glances. The leader's grip on his sword tightened. "Lost? No one comes to Kuri by accident. You are a spy for the shogun, or worse, a pirate." Before Naruto could respond, a 5th figure emerged from the woods. A small child, a girl no older than 6, with wide, curious eyes and a spray of freckles across her nose. "Shish." He clutched a woven doll in her hands and peeked out from behind the leader's legs, her fear warring with her fascination. "Papa," she whispered, "his hair is like the sun." The leader, her father, shot her a stern look. "Stay back, Akari." But his posture softened almost imperceptibly. Naruto's own posture relaxed. He was good with kids. They didn't see the monster, the weapon, the Jinchuriki. They just saw him. He offered the girl a small, tired smile. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt anyone." His smile seemed to unnerve the men more than any threat could have. It was too easy, too confident. The samurai drew their blades in a single, fluid motion, the rasp of steel a sharp, ugly sound in the peaceful air. "Do not move, outsider." The leader barked. The little girl, Akari, startled by the sudden tension and the flash of metal, gasped and took a step back. Her foot caught on an exposed root, and she tumbled backward, her head striking a sharp, black rock with a sickening crack. She didn't cry out. She just lay still, a trickle of dark blood beginning to mat her black hair. Everything happened at once. The father screamed his daughter's name, his discipline shattering in a heartbeat. The other samurai froze, their aggression forgotten in the face of the sudden tragedy. Naruto moved. He didn't think. He just acted. He crossed the 20 feet between them in 2 silent, impossibly fast steps. A blur of motion that their eyes could barely track. He was kneeling by the girl's side before the father had even processed what had happened. "Get away from her," the man roared, raising his katana. Naruto ignored him. He placed his left hand gently on the girl's forehead. Her breathing was shallow, her skin was clammy, and the gash on her head was deep. It was a fatal injury. A wave of cold dread washed over him. He couldn't feel Kurama, couldn't feel the 6 paths power. What if he couldn't heal her? The thought was unbearable. He couldn't stand by and watch another person die. Not again. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world, shutting out the screaming father and the swords of the other men. He reached deep inside himself, past the emptiness, past the grief, searching for any lingering spark. Any forgotten ember of the sun he had once held. He found something. A tiny, flickering warmth, hidden away in the deepest corner of his soul. It was Kurama's final gift, a parting dreg of chakra left behind not for battle, but for this. For him. A faint, reddish gold light enveloped his hand. It wasn't the overwhelming flood of power he was used to, but a gentle, precious warmth. He poured it into the child, focusing all of his will, all of his desperation, into the act. The samurai watched, stunned into silence. They saw the golden light, felt the impossible warmth radiating from the stranger. They saw the horrific wound on the little girl's head stitch itself together, the skin smoothing over as if it had never been broken. A moment later, Akari's eyes fluttered open. She blinked, dazed, and sat up, touching the back of her head. "Papa, I fell." The father's katana clattered to the ground. He stumbled forward and fell to his knees, gathering his daughter into his arms. His body shaking with relieved sobs. The other three samurai just stared, their swords held limply at their sides, their faces a mask of utter disbelief. They had just witnessed a miracle. Akami's touch. The effort, however small, was too much for Naruto. The world swam in a haze of black spots, and he collapsed sideways onto the sand, the last of his strength gone. The last conscious thought he had was of the little girl's wide, wondrous eyes, free of fear. It was a good thought. Maybe, he mused as darkness took him, this new world wouldn't be so bad after all. News traveled fast in Wano, carried on the lips of merchants and the whispers of travelers. In the fertile fields of Ringo and the bustling ports of Udon, stories began to circulate of a strange man found on the shores of Kuri. A man with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of the summer sky. A man who could heal mortal wounds with a touch of his glowing hand. Some said he was a demon, a trickster spirit from the sea. Others, remembering the old prophecies, whispered that he was a god, a sign of changing times. The stories eventually reached the flower capital, the heart of Wano, a city still breathing a collective sigh of relief after 2 decades of tyranny. The iron rule of Kaido and the treacherous shogun Orochi was broken, but the peace was fragile, a delicate vase threatening to shatter at the slightest tremor. The great clans, the daimyos who had once bowed to Oden Kazuki, were now restless, sniffing at the power vacuum left in the tyrant's wake. In the highest chamber of the shogun's castle, Kazuki Hiyori listened to the report with a practiced stillness. She sat behind a simple, unadorned wooden desk, her elegant kimono the color of dawn mist. Her face, renowned throughout Wano for its beauty, was a serene mask that betrayed none of the turmoil she felt. At 26, she carried the weight of her country on her slender shoulders. With her brother, Momonosuke, still a child and learning the ways of a leader, she served as the de facto ruler, the steady hand guiding Wano through its tumultuous rebirth. "He healed the child?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the murmuring of the men assembled before her. They were the 9 red scabbards, her father's loyal retainers, the legendary samurai who had survived 20 years of hardship to see their dream of a free Wano realized. Kanamon, their leader, a man whose loyalty was as unbending as the steel of his sword, bowed his head. Instantly, Hiyori-sama, Ishikawa swears the wound was fatal. But the man, he simply touched her, and it was gone. Then he collapsed. "He has been unconscious since," added the rotund, jolly-faced Kikunojo. "Ishikawa and his men have been watching over him. They are afraid of him, but also in his debt." Hiyori's fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the polished wood of her desk. An outsider, a man with impossible powers. Prophecy and superstition were the lifeblood of Wano. And she knew exactly what the people would be thinking. She thought of the promise her father had made, the words her mother had spoken in the final, fiery moments of Oden's castle, in 20 years' time, on a moonlit night. 9 shadows will be cast, and you will know the dazzling dawn. The dawn had come, but the sun was not yet risen. The country was still shrouded in mist. This could be a spark in a powder keg, Denjiro, the sharp-witted master swordsman, said, his arms crossed. The daimyos are already arguing over land and influence. A figure like this, a supposed miracle worker, Su, LD be used as a symbol to rally a rebellion. Or he could be an agent of the world government, a scout for an invasion. Or he could be just what he says he is, Rizzo the Mist mused, a man who was simply lost. Hiyori looked at each of them in turn, these men who were more like uncles to her than subjects. They were strong, loyal, and brave, but they were men of a bygone era, men of the sword. Problems Wano faced now could not all be solved with a blade. Kanamon, she said, her decision made. Take Nekomamushi and Kawamatsu. Go to Kuri. Find this man. Be cautious, but be respectful. Learn his story. I want to know who he is, where he comes from, and what he wants. Do not treat him as a threat unless he proves to be one. Kanamon nodded sharply. As you command, Hiyori-sama. As the scabbards filed out, leaving her alone with the setting sun painting the room in hues of orange and purple, Hiyori walked to the balcony. She looked out over the sprawling capital, the city her father had loved. The joy of liberation had been replaced by the heavy burden of reconstruction. The people needed more than just freedom, they needed a leader, a symbol of strength and stability. Her brother would be that leader, one day. But he was just a boy. Wano needed something more, something now. And as she stared out at the horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger on the beach was not just a random piece of flotsam, but a stone cast into the pond of Wano's fate, its ripples destined to change everything. Hundreds of miles away, in the rugged, untamed province of Kuri, another heard the tale. But she heard it not as a political problem or a potential threat, but as a thrilling new chapter in the epic she lived every day. Yamato sat cross-legged atop the highest torii gate of a forgotten shrine, her massive spiked kanabo, Takaru, resting on her shoulders. The wind whipped her long, white hair, a stark contrast to the brilliant red horns that curled from her temples. She chewed on a piece of dried squid and gazed down at the small village where the golden-haired stranger was being kept. She had heard the story from the villagers herself. They spoke in hushed, odd tones, their fear warring with a blossoming reverence. A miracle, a god's touch. Yamato didn't believe in gods, not the kind that answered prayers. The only god she had ever known was a drunken, USIVE tyrant who called himself a dragon and had tried to beat the freedom out of her. Her father, Kaido. But she did believe in heroes. She believed in Kazuki Oden, the man whose spirit she had emulated, whose journals she had memorized, whose very identity she had tried to adopt. Oden had been larger than life, a man of impossible strength and boundless heart. He had sailed the seas, seen the world, and returned with stories that ignited a fire in Yamato's soul. He wrote of men who could walk on water, breathe fire, and command lightning. He wrote of a world beyond Wano's closed borders, a world of infinite adventure. This stranger, this Naruto, sounded like someone who had walked right out of Oden's journal. She had seen him from a distance. She had watched Ishikawa's men carry his Unko and Skyus form to the village elder's house. Even from afar, she could feel it. A presence, a power that slumbered beneath his skin, so vast and potent that it made the air around him hum, even in his sleep. It was a power that dwarfed her father's, but it felt different. It wasn't the oppressive, arrogant force of Kaido's will. It was warm, like the sun itself. It felt like freedom. A man with hair like the sun. She murmured to herself, a wide, excited grin spreading across her face. Sounds like the kind of person Oden would have shared a drink with. She hopped down from the gate, landing with a soft thud that barely disturbed the dust. Her decision was made. The stuffy nobles in the capital could send their delegations and play their political games. Yamato was going to get answers the Oden way. She was going to walk right up to this stranger and look him in the eye. And maybe, if he was as strong as he felt, she would challenge him to a fight. After all, that was the best way to get to know someone. She slung her kanabo over her shoulder and began the walk down to the village, a bounce in her step. For the first time since the raid on Onigashima, since the Great War had ended, she felt a genuine spark of excitement. The future of Wano was being written, and she had a feeling a thrilling new character had just made his entrance. Naruto woke slowly, dragged from a deep and dreamless sleep. The first thing he registered was the softness beneath him. Not sand, but a thick, woven futon. The air smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. He was indoors. He opened his eyes and saw a simple, rustic ceiling of dark wood beams. He sat up, his body still aching, but the sharp edge of the pain had dulled. His wounds were healing, slowly, the way a normal person's would. It was an unnerving sensation. He looked around. He was in a small, sparsely furnished room. A single paper screen door led outside. His torn mesh shirt lay folded neatly on a nearby stool, and a clean, folded kimono lay in its place. He was in the home of the village elder, the father of the girl he had saved. Ishikawa. The man now sat in the corner of the room, his head bowed, his sword lying on the floor beside him, not as a weapon, but as an offering. "You are awake," Ishikawa said, his voice quiet, heavy with reverence. He did not look up. "We did not know what to do. You saved my daughter, my Akari. I have no words to thank you. My life is yours." Naruto swung his legs off the futon. "I don't want your life," he said, his voice still a little rough. "Just some answers. Where am I?" "You are in the village of Amagasa, in the province of Kuri," Ishikawa replied, finally looking up. His eyes were filled with awe. "In the land of Wano." Wano. The name meant nothing to him. "And where is Wano?" Ishikawa looked confused. "It is Wano, an island, surrounded by the sea. An isolated island country." That explained the archaic dialect and the samurai. It also meant he was well and truly lost. There was no Leaf Village. No land of fire. He was somewhere else entirely. The thought should have terrified him, but he was too tired, too numb, to feel anything but a deep, resonant exhaustion. "How long was I out?" 2 days, Ishikawa said. "We were worried, but the elders said not to disturb a resting kami." "I'm not a god," Naruto said flatly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He had been called a savior, a hero, a demon, a monster. God was a new one, and he liked it even less than the others. "I'm just a man." Before Ishikawa could argue, the screen door slid open. 3 men stood there, their silhouettes framed by the midday sun. Naruto recognized the armor, the swords. More samurai. The one in the center, a man with a ridiculous topknot that defied gravity, stepped forward. His eyes, sharp and discerning, swept over Naruto, taking in every detail. "So you are the stranger," Kinemon said, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. His voice was cautious, courteous, but held an undercurrent of steel. "I am Kinemon, a retainer of the Kazuki clan. I have been sent by the acting regent, Hiyori-sama, to speak with you." Naruto eyed them warily. These men felt different from Ishikawa's village patrol. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence of true warriors, their power a palpable aura in the small room. He pushed himself to his feet, his muscles protesting. He stood his full height, meeting Kinemon's gaze without flinching. "I have nothing to hide," Naruto said. "But I'm done answering questions on my knees." A flicker of respect showed in Kinemon's eyes. This man was no mere vagrant. Despite his ragged appearance and obvious exhaustion, he possessed an unshakable core of confidence. Suddenly, a new voice, loud and boisterous, cut through the tense atmosphere. "Hey, you 3 are blocking the view." Everyone turned. Standing behind the scabbards, her massive kanabo resting casually on her shoulder, was Yamato. She had a wide, predatory grin on her face, and her crimson eyes were fixed solely on Naruto, alight with an almost manic glee. "So you're the one," she said, pushing past a startled Kinemon and stepping into the room. She circled Naruto, looking him up and down like a prize horse. "You don't look like much, but I can feel it. You're strong, really strong." She stopped in front of him, her grin widening. "My name is Yamato. Fight me." Nekomamushi, the massive cat-like mink, let out a hearty laugh. "Gururara." Straight to the point as always, Yamato-sama. Kinemon looked horrified. "Yamato-sama, this is hardly the time or place for." "It's the perfect time," Yamato declared, spinning her kanabo and slamming its base onto the floorboards, making the whole house shake. "I want to see what you can do, sun hair." Naruto just stared at her. A woman with horns and a giant club wanted to fight him 2 days after he'd woken up from a dimension-hopping, world-saving battle that had cost him his best friend. He was tired, grieving, and utterly lost. And for the first time since he had woken up on that beach, he felt a genuine, familiar emotion bubble up inside him. Annoyance. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. You'll have to get in line, he said, his voice dry. He gestured to Kinemon and the other two scabbards, who had now drawn their swords, alarmed by Yamato's aggressive posture. These guys look like they want to go first. Kinemon's face was grim. The situation had escalated far beyond his control. This stranger was an unknown, and Yamato was a force of nature. A fight here, now, would be disastrous. Outsider, he said, his voice low and dangerous, you will surrender and come with us to the capital. Do so, and you will not be harmed. Naruto sighed. It seemed trouble had a way of finding him. No matter what dimension he was in. He had no interest in fighting these men. They were just soldiers following orders, trying to protect their home. But he wasn't about to let himself be taken prisoner, either. He had spent too much of his life in cages, literal or otherwise. Look, he said, raising his hand slowly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. He never got to finish the sentence. One of the younger, more hot-headed samurai behind Kinemon, spooked by the tension, lunged forward, his blade aimed at Naruto's chest. It was a foolish, impulsive move. For Naruto, the world slowed to a crawl. He saw the arc of the blade, the fear in the young man's eyes, the shouts of alarm from the others. He didn't have the chakra for a substitution jutsu, nor the strength for a flashy counterattack. He didn't need it. He moved. With a grace that seemed impossible for his tired body, he sidestepped the thrust, his left hand coming up to gently cup the samurai's wrist. He flowed with the man's momentum, using it against him, twisting his arm in a way that was painful but not damaging. He dipped low, sweeping the man's feet out from under him, and in the space of a single heartbeat. The samurai was on his back on the floor, his own sword pressed gently against his throat, held in Naruto's steady hand. The other samurai froze, their eyes wide with shock. It hadn't been a fight. It had been a dismissal. Naruto looked up from the disarmed man, his blue eyes holding no malice, only a profound weariness. Can we talk now? He asked. But before anyone could answer, the screen door on the other side of the room slid open. A woman stood there, her presence so commanding that it instantly drew every eye. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with long, dark hair that flowed like silk and eyes that held the wisdom of an old soul. She was dressed in a kimono of the finest make, and she carried herself with the innate grace of royalty. It was Kazuki Hiyori. She had followed her retainers, a nagging feeling in her gut telling her that this was a moment she needed to witness herself. Her gaze fell upon the scene, her finest samurai held at bay, the wild daughter of Kaido spoiling for a fight. And in the center of it all, the blonde-haired stranger, holding a sword to one of her men with an expression that looked more like an apology than a threat. Their eyes met. In that moment, Hiyori saw past the foreign features, past the rumors and the fear. She saw a man holding an impossible amount of power in check, a man whose eyes held a sadness as deep as the sea. She saw not a threat, but a solution. Or perhaps, an even bigger problem. Yamato let out a low whistle. Well, she breathed, her eyes gleaming as she looked from Hiyori to Naruto and back again. This just got interesting. Hiyori's calm, authoritative voice filled the room, cutting through the tension like a finely honed blade. Release him, she said, her eyes never leaving Naruto's. He will come to the capital. Not as a prisoner, but as my guest. Naruto slowly removed the blade from the samurai's throat and handed the sword back to him, hilt first. He stood up and faced the woman. He didn't know who she was. But her arrival had changed the very air in the room. He gave a slight, formal bow, an old habit from dealing with stuffy dignitaries. I accept your invitation. He agreed not because he was intimidated, but because he was tired of fighting. He was tired of being a weapon. He just wanted to find a place to rest, to grieve, to understand what had become of his life. He followed Hiyori out of the small house and into the bright, unfamiliar sunlight of Wano, the weight of 1,000 curious and hostile eyes upon him. He had no way of knowing that he wasn't just walking toward a city, but toward a destiny he never asked for, a crown he never wanted, and a future that would be forged in the heart of this isolated, beautiful, and broken land. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Empty Throne. The journey to the flower capital was a silent, tense affair. Naruto walked in the center of a diamond formation of the scabbards, a position that was ostensibly for an honored guest but felt functionally identical to that of a high-value prisoner. He didn't mind. The silence gave him time to observe, to feel the pulse of this new, strange land. The people of Kuri, who had first looked at him with fear, now bowed their heads as he passed, their eyes filled with a mystified reverence. He was the golden kami who had saved a child. The story had already become a myth. As they crested a hill, the capital unfurled before them. It was a city unlike any he had ever seen. Vibrant, tiered pagodas with gracefully curved roofs reached for the sky, their walls painted in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. A vast network of canals crisscrossed the city, spanned by elegant, arched bridges. Cherry blossom trees, their petals a riot of pink and white, lined the streets, their fragrance carried on the breeze. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, yet beneath the surface, Naruto's senses, honed by years of sniffing out deception, picked up a discordant hum. It was the scent of fear, the quiet murmur of unease that clung to the city like its morning mist. This was a place that had been celebrating its liberation for only a few short weeks, and the ghost of the tyrant it had deposed still lingered in the shadows. The stares he received here were different from those in Kuri. The awe was replaced by a sharp, calculating curiosity. He was an anomaly, a disruption to the fragile new order. As he was led through the gates of the shogun's castle, a colossal structure that seemed to be carved from the mountain itself, he felt the weight of history settle upon him. This was a seat of power, a place of intrigue and blood. And he had just been thrust onto its stage. His quarters were opulent, a suite of rooms with sliding paper screens painted with scenes of majestic dragons and serene landscapes. The floors were covered in soft tatami mats, and a low table of polished cherry wood sat in the center of the main room. Silk kimonos, far finer than the simple cotton one he'd been given in the village, were laid out for him. It was a gilded cage, a fact reinforced by the two grim-faced samurai stationed impassively outside his door. Hiyori had left him with a simple instruction: rest. We will speak on the morrow. But rest was the last thing on Naruto's mind. He spent the day in a state of quiet observation, watching the life of the castle unfold from his balcony. He saw the strict protocols, the bowing retainers, the subtle hierarchies. It was a world of rigid tradition, a stark contrast to the chaotic, merit-based world of shinobi he knew. The next day, he was summoned, not to a private audience, but to the great hall, where the council of daimyos was in session. He was given a cushion to the side, a place for an observer, not a participant. The hall was cavernous, its ceiling held up by massive wooden pillars. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat a young boy with dark hair tied in a topknot. This was Momonosuke, the new shogun, a child trying to wear his father's shoes. Beside him, radiating a calm authority that the boy had yet to grow into, was Hiyori. The air in the room was thick with tension. The daimyos, leaders of Wano's powerful clans, were arrayed before the throne. Naruto took their measure. An old, stern-faced man with a white beard and the rigid posture of a lifelong warrior, whom he heard addressed as Shimotsuki Yoritomo of Ringo, argued for strengthening Wano's armies, advocating for a swift and brutal consolidation of power. A younger, more pragmatic-looking man from Udon spoke of reopening trade routes, of feeding the people and rebuilding the infrastructure that Kaido had let crumble. And then there was a third faction. They were outwardly deferential, their leader a man with a serpent's smile and eyes that never seemed to blink. They were the pardoned loyalists of the Kurozumi clan, followers of the previous, treacherous shogun. They spoke of unity and forgiveness, but their words were slick with poison, subtly questioning Hiyori's decisions, sowing seeds of doubt about the new government's stability. Naruto listened, saying nothing. He had sat through countless such meetings in Konoha, listening to the village elders and the Jonin council argue. He knew the language of politics was universal. It was a dance of power, ambition, and fear. And he, the silent stranger, was the biggest unknown in the room. His presence was a stone dropped into their carefully balanced pond, and the ripples were making them all deeply uncomfortable. And what of the outsider? The Kurozumi loyalist asked, his voice smooth as silk as he turned his gaze on Naruto. He possesses an unknown power. Can we truly trust a man who washed up on our shores with no history and no allegiance? Hiyori's voice cut through the murmuring. He saved the life of a child of Wano. That is allegiance enough for now. He is a guest of the Kazuki clan. Her word was final, but the challenge had been made. Every eye in the room was on Naruto, judging him, weighing him. He met their gazes, his own expression unreadable, and simply inclined his head, a gesture of respect that conceded nothing. The council meeting ended with many pronouncements but no real resolutions. The fractures in Wano's leadership were clear. As the hall emptied, Naruto remained, feeling the lingering tension in the air. He felt a presence approach and turned to see Hiyori standing a few feet away. Her formal mask replaced by a look of weary frustration. "I apologize for that," she said softly. "They are like dogs fighting over a scrap of meat, forgetting that the hunter who killed the beast may yet return." Quote, "They're afraid," Naruto replied simply. "Fear makes people stupid." Hiyori gave a small, sad smile and gestured for him to follow her. She led him from the stuffy hall out into a private garden. A tranquil space of raked sand, moss-covered stones, and a gnarled, ancient cherry tree. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the air was cool and peaceful. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the gentle gurgle of a bamboo fountain. "My mother once told me of a prophecy," Hiyori began, her voice barely a whisper. She spoke of a dazzling dawn, that would arrive after 20 years of darkness. We believed the defeat of Kaido was that dawn. But the sun has not yet risen. The land is still in twilight, and I fear the darkness may close in again. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "The old stories, the prophecies of this land, they sometimes speak of a hero from the sea. A man who will either be our salvation or our final ruin. And then you appear, a man with the power of a god, with hair the color of the sun itself. Forgive me if I do not know whether to see you as a blessing or a curse." Naruto leaned against the railing of a small wooden bridge, looking at his own reflection in the koi pond below. He saw the weariness in his own eyes. "I'm not a hero," he said, the words heavy with the ghosts of his past. "I've been called one. I led armies, fought in a war that was supposed to end all wars. We won. But I look at the people I couldn't save, the friends I lost. Being a hero just means you're the one left standing at the end." He didn't tell her everything. He didn't speak of the tailed beasts, of the Otsutsuki, of the friend he had been forced to fight. But he let her see a glimpse of the burden he carried. He let her see the man behind the myth that was already beginning to form around him. Hiyori saw it. She saw a loneliness in him that mirrored her own. She had spent 20 years hiding her identity, playing the part of a courtesan. Her heart locked away. He had spent his life shouldering the world's expectations, his true self buried under the weight of his power. They were two pillars, standing alone, holding up crumbling worlds. "What is it you want, Naruto-san?" she asked, her voice gentle. "If you are not here to conquer us or save us, what is your purpose?" Naruto looked up from the water, his gaze meeting hers. His answer was simple, honest, and filled with a longing that resonated deep in her soul. "I want to find a way home," he said. "But until I do, I just want a quiet place to eat a bowl of ramen." A genuine, beautiful smile bloomed on Hiyori's face, transforming her features. For a moment, she wasn't the regent of Wano, but just a woman, intrigued by the strange, sad, and unexpectedly simple man before her. "Well," she said, her voice lighter than he'd heard it. "The ramen, at least, I can provide." The next day, the fragile peace of that moment was shattered. Word of Naruto's presence, and the whispers of his power, had spread through the castle. To the proud samurai of Wano, power was something to be tested, to be measured in the clash of steel. In the castle's central courtyard, a young samurai, his hair tied in a neat, warrior's topknot, stood waiting. He was Uesugi Tatsuya, the eldest son of the daimyo of Udon, a swordsman whose skill was said to be prodigious. He was proud, ambitious, and he could not abide the idea of an untested outsider being hailed as a god. He had issued a formal challenge, and by the code of Bushido, to refuse was to admit cowardice. The entire court had gathered to watch. Naruto stood opposite him, clad in a simple, dark kimono, his feet bare on the cool flagstones. He looked reluctant, his shoulders slumped slightly. He had no desire to fight this boy. "I will not draw a weapon against a man who carries none," Tatsuya declared, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. It was a beautiful blade, its scabbard lacquered black with a silver heron motif. "Good," Naruto said with a sigh. "Then this will be over faster." Tatsuya's eyes narrowed. The quiet confidence of the outsider was infuriating. With a sharp cry, he drew his sword. The steel singing in the morning air. He was fast, a blur of motion as he closed the distance, his blade a silver arc aimed at Naruto's neck. It was the first move in the Heron's Dance, a famous Uesugi sword style known for its speed and grace. The crowd gasped. Hiyori, watching from a balcony, clenched her fists, her knuckles white. Kanamon stood stoically, his experienced eyes watching every minute detail. In the crowd, Yamato leaned forward, her red eyes wide with anticipation, a bucket of fried squid in her lap. Naruto didn't move from his spot. At the last possible second, he ducked under the swing. The wind from the blade ruffling his hair. He flowed past Tatsuya, his movement so fluid it was like he was made of water. Tatsuya, his attack missing, stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward. He spun, correcting himself instantly, and launched into a furious combination of slashes and thrusts. It was like watching a storm rage against a cliffside. Tatsuya was the storm, fast, deadly, and relentless. Naruto was the cliff. He didn't retreat, he didn't block, he simply wasn't there. He swayed, dipped, and pivoted, avoiding each deadly strike by a paper's breadth. He moved with a quiet, unhurried efficiency that made the younger man's frantic assault look clumsy and wasteful. He never took his eyes off Tatsuya's, and in them, he saw the boy's confidence begin to crack, replaced by a growing frustration and a dawning sliver of fear. The court was silent, mesmerized. They were witnessing something they couldn't comprehend. The outsider wasn't just dodging. He was controlling the entire fight without laying a single finger on his opponent. He was making one of Wano's finest young swordsmen defeat himself. Tatsuya, his face slick with sweat, his pride stinging, let out a final desperate roar. He put all of his strength and speed into one last, powerful overhead slash, a blow meant to cleave a man in two. This time, Naruto met it. As the blade descended, he stepped forward into the attack. His left hand shot up, not to block the flat of the blade, but to catch the hilt, his fingers wrapping around Tatsuya's own, arresting the sword's momentum in an instant. At the same time, his other hand, the bandaged stump of his right arm, came up and jabbed sharply into the boy's solar plexus. It wasn't a punch, just a hard, precise prod. The air rushed out of Tatsuya's lungs in a pained gasp. His grip on his sword slackened. In a single, impossibly fluid motion, Naruto spun the katana out of his grasp, reversed it, and laid the cold, flat side of the blade against the young samurai's neck. Silence. The duel was over. It had taken less than a minute. Tatsuya stood frozen, panting, his eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't just been beaten. He had been utterly and completely dismantled. Naruto stepped back and offered the sword back to him, hilt first. "Your style is fast," he said, his voice devoid of any mockery. "But you put too much power into your first move. You leave yourself open." He looked the young man in the eye. "There's no honor in starting a fight you can't win." Tatsuya stared at the offered sword, his face burning with shame. But as he looked at the outsider, he saw no triumph in his eyes, no arrogance. Only a calm, quiet assessment. He took his sword and bowed, a deep, respectful bow that conceded utter defeat. The court erupted in a wave of stunned murmurs. Before the whispers could grow into a roar, a loud, enthusiastic clap echoed through the courtyard. It was followed by the sound of someone crunching loudly on fried squid. Yamato vaulted over the railing she'd been leaning on, landing in the center of the courtyard with a heavy thud. "That was boring," she declared, pointing an accusatory, half-eaten squid at Naruto. "You were just playing with him. That's not a real fight. Don't hold back with me." Hiyori's face fell. "Yamato-san, please." But Yamato wasn't listening. She tossed her empty snack bucket aside and hefted her massive kanabo Takaru from her shoulder. The spiked club was as big as a man, and she swung it as if it weighed nothing. She slammed the base of it into the flagstones, cracking the stone and sending a tremor through the courtyard. A wild, joyful grin stretched across her face. "The capital is so stuffy," she announced. "All this talking and bowing. It's time for some action. Show me what you've really got, Naruto." She had dropped the honorific, her tone familiar and challenging. Naruto looked at the woman with the horns, at the giant, terrifying club, and at the manic, exhilarating fire in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen on Killer Bee's face, on the fourth Raikages. It was the look of someone who only truly felt alive in the heat of battle. He had been holding himself in check, bottling up his grief and frustration since he'd arrived in this world. And suddenly, the thought of letting just a little of it out was incredibly appealing. A slow smile spread across his own face. The first genuine, unrestrained smile he'd had in days. It transformed his features, the embers of his old self flaring into a small, bright flame. "All right," he said, rolling his shoulders and feeling the satisfying pop in his muscles. "But if I break anything, she's paying for it," he added, hooking a thumb toward Hiyori. Yamato laughed, a loud, hearty sound. "If you can, I'll pay for it myself." She attacked. There was no ceremony, no posturing. She moved with the explosive force of a charging beast, her kanabo swinging in a wide, horizontal arc meant to turn him into paste. Naruto didn't dodge this time. He met it. He dropped into a low stance and channeled a surge of chakra into his left arm, blocking the club with his forearm. Boom! The impact was like a cannon blast. A shockwave erupted from the point of contact, kicking up a storm of dust and sending a web of cracks spreading across the courtyard stones. The crowd cried out in alarm, staggering back. Yamato's eyes widened in shock. No one, not even her father in his human form, had ever blocked her full-strength swing so casually. Naruto grunted, the force of the blow jarring him to the bone. "Not bad," he admitted, pushing the club back. "You're strong." "So are you," she roared, her excitement palpable. She leapt back and began to spin, a whirlwind of white hair and black steel, her club a blur of destruction. The spar that followed was nothing like the surgical precision of the duel. It was a force of nature. A battle between two demigods. Naruto, finally letting loose a fraction of his speed, became a golden blur. Weaving around Yamato's devastating swings. He didn't have the chakra for his more powerful jutsu, but he didn't need them. His movements were precise, his strikes powerful. He delivered a sharp kick to her side that sent her sliding across the stone, and she retaliated with a swing that forced him to leap 20 feet into the air. In his hand, a swirling sphere of blue chakra began to form. A Rasengan. It was small, unstable without his other hand to shape it, but it was still a vortex of destructive power. Yamato saw it, and her grin widened. "Yes, that's it." Rost began to coat her kanabo as she channeled her own power, a technique inherited from her father's devil fruit. She met his charge with a powerful upward swing. Namuji Hyo, Rasengan. Their attacks collided. A maelstrom of wind and ice exploded outward, engulfing the center of the courtyard. The temperature plummeted, and a fierce gale tore through the crowd. When the vortex of energy dissipated, the two of them stood in the center of a newly formed crater, panting, bruised, and covered in a thin layer of frost. They stared at each other for a long moment, chests heaving. Then, simultaneously, they broke into laughter. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated exhilaration. A laugh of mutual respect earned in the only way warriors like them truly understood. You're really something else, Naruto." Yamato gasped, leaning on her kanabo for support. "You too," Naruto admitted, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. "You hit like a truck." The court was silent, their minds ble to process what they had just witnessed. They had seen more raw power unleashed in that 5-minute spar than they had in the entire raid on Onigashima. Hiyori stared at the crater in the middle of her courtyard, a mixture of horror and awe on her face. This man, this Naruto, was not just a warrior. He was a calamity, a walking, talking natural disaster. And he was her guest. That night, the castle was buzzing. The duel and the subsequent battle had cemented Naruto's status as a figure of immense power. The Kurozumi loyalists, however, saw something different. They saw an existential threat. This outsider, with his godlike strength and his burgeoning rapport with both the unpredictable Yamato and the regent Hiyori, was an insurmountable obstacle to their quiet, patient plan of regaining control of Wano. If he formally allied with the Kazuki clan, their ambitions would be reduced to dust. They had to act, and they had to act now. Hiyori was in her private quarters, the scent of GHT blooming jasmine drifting in from the garden. She was trying to meditate, to calm the storm of thoughts that the day's events had unleashed. Naruto's power was terrifying, a weapon that could either protect Wano or shatter it into a million pieces. Yet, she thought of his quiet conversation with her in the garden, of the profound sadness in his eyes. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, and it was both frightening and fascinating. In his own suite of rooms across the castle, Naruto was attempting to do the same. He sat in Seiza, trying to reach for the natural energy of the world, to enter sage mode. But his senses were muted, his connection to the world frayed. Still, even in his diminished state, some instincts remained, honed to a razor's edge. A flicker, a disturbance in the air, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of bloodlust. His eyes snapped open. Assassins. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stop to think. He moved. He poured what little chakra he had into his legs and became a silent, golden flash. He flowed through the corridors of the castle, a ghost moving faster than the eye could see. The guards outside Hiyori's chambers never even saw him pass. Inside, Hiyori's eyes had opened a second before her door was kicked in. 5 figures, clad head to toe in black, silent as death, swarmed into the room, their blades drawn. They were Kurozumi agents, Orochi's elite guard. Men who had feigned repentance but whose loyalty to their fallen clan was absolute. Hiyori reacted with the poise of a woman who had survived 20 years in enemy territory. She kicked a low table at the first attacker and drew a small, elegant tanto from the sleeve of her kimono. She was no match for 5 trained assassins, but she would not die a victim. The first blade sliced through the air. It never reached her. Naruto appeared between her and the assassins as if from thin air. He hadn't even drawn a weapon. He simply stood there, his back to her, a silent, immovable wall. The assassins froze, their killing intent faltering in the face of this sudden, impossible appearance. "Get out," Naruto said, his voice dangerously low. For a moment, they hesitated. Then, their training took over. They were 5 to 1. They attacked. What happened next was not a fight. It was an execution. Naruto didn't bother with fancy techniques. He let go. For a single, terrifying instant, he released. The smallest fraction of the pressure he kept constantly clamped down on his own presence. A wave of pure, suffocating power washed through the room. It was not chakra. It was something older, more primal. It was the residual aura of the 9 tails, the killing intent of a being that was a living embodiment of war. The assassins, men who had lived and breathed death their entire lives, choked on it. Their knees buckled, their swords trembled in their hands. It felt like the air had turned to stone, crushing them, suffocating them. They were staring into the eyes of a god, and it was not a benevolent one. Naruto moved. His left arm was a blur, a series of short, precise strikes to throats, temples, and joints. There were 5 sharp cracks, and 5 bodies crumpled to the floor, unconscious or dead before they hit the ground. It was over in less than 3 seconds. Silence descended on the room, broken only by the sound of Hiyori's sharp, indrawn breath. Naruto stood amidst the fallen assassins, the murderous pressure vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He turned to her, the faint, dangerous glow in his eyes fading, replaced by a simple, urgent concern. "Are you all right?" At that moment, the scabbards, led by a frantic Kanamon, burst into the room, drawn by the muffled sounds of the attack. They skidded to a halt, taking in the scene, their princess, safe but shaken, 5 of the shogun's guard, broken on the floor, and the outsider, standing over them like a guardian deity. The proof was undeniable. His power was not just for show. His loyalty, in that moment, was absolute. An emergency council was called. The daimyos roused from their beds. They gathered in the great hall, the torches casting long, flickering shadows. They had all seen the evidence. They had all felt the residual tremor of Naruto's power. Fear and awe warred on their faces. Wano was on a knife's edge, and this man, this stranger, was the fulcrum. Finally, the old traditionalist, Shimotsuki Yoritomo, rose to his feet. His voice echoing in the stunned silence. "We have been blind," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the other daimyos before landing on Naruto. "We have been squabbling over the past while the future stands before us. Today, we have seen this man's character. In the duel, he showed us control and mercy. In his spar with the Oni princess, he showed us power to rival the gods. And just now, He showed us a fierce, unwavering will to protect the Kozuki bloodline. He paused, letting his words sink in. Wano is fractured. The throne is empty but for a child. We need a pillar, a weapon, a leader. But he is an outsider. He cannot rule. The blood of Odin must endure. And the untamed power of Kaido's daughter must be harnessed for Wano, not left to run wild. Yoritomo took a deep breath. His next words would either save Wano or plunge it into a new civil war. Therefore, I propose a solution to bind these three forces into one. To unite the strength of the outsider, the legitimacy of the Kozuki, and the power of the Oni. I propose that the stranger, Naruto, take both Kozuki Hiyori and Yamato as his wives. He will not be shogun, but the shield and sword that defends the throne. A new trinity, to forge a new Wano. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound you could hear the torches sputter. Hiyori's perfect composure finally cracked, her eyes wide with shock. Yamato, who had been brought to the council and was leaning against a pillar-looking board, stood bolt upright, her jaw agape. And Naruto, the man who had faced down gods and monsters, who had stared into the abyss and not flinched, could only stare back, his mind a complete and utter blank. He had been called many things in his life. Hero, demon, savior, knucklehead. But, U.S. band, to two of the most powerful and complicated women he had ever met. That was a title he had never, in his wildest dreams, anticipated. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A Vow of Steel and Silk. The old samurai's words fell into the cavernous hull and shattered the silence, leaving behind a ringing void. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The daimyos, the scabbards, the very pillars of the castle seemed to have been struck dumb by the sheer audacity of the proposal. Naruto felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were floating above the scene, watching a play about some other poor fool's life. Then the numbness receded, and a hot wave of disbelief washed over him. Marry them. Both of them. He looked at Hiyori. Her serene mask had finally cracked. Her eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted in shock. The composure she had maintained through war, tyranny, and political strife had been undone by the pronouncement of a single, geriatric daimyo. Her shock was his own, mirrored in the face of a princess. He then glanced at Yamato, who was still leaning against the far pillar. Her boredom had evaporated, replaced by a look of such profound, comical outrage that, under any other circumstances, he might have laughed. Her mouth was agape, her red eyes blazing. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her kanabo, the wood groaning under the pressure. What did you just say, you old fossil? Yamato's voice was a low growl, a rumble of thunder that promised a storm. Shimotsuki Yoritomo, the elder who had made the proposal, did not flinch. He turned his steady, implacable gaze upon her. I spoke of unity, Yamato-sama, of harnessing your great power for the good of this nation, not just for your own whims. To bind you to the future of Wano. Bind me. Yamato straightened up, her full height seeming to fill the hull with a dangerous energy. Bind me. My father tried to bind me with chains for 20 years. You think a wedding ring will hold me? I am Kozuki Odin. IWILL not be some political broodmare for a man I just met. She punctuated the last sentence by slamming the butt of her kanabo into the stone floor. A spiderweb of cracks radiated from the impact point, a testament to her fury. The Kurozumi loyalists looked on with undisguised glee. This was better than they could have hoped. The proposal had not created unity, but a new, spectacular schism. Hiyori found her voice, rising to her feet with a fluid grace that belied the turmoil in her mind. Lord Shimotsuki, she said, her tone level but carrying an edge of cold steel. Your concern for Wano is noted. But this is an extreme and unprecedented solution. Matters of the heart, and of the Kozuki line, are not for the council to decide in such a manner. It was a masterful deflection, an attempt to regain control. But the idea was already loose in the hall, a spark in the dry tinder of Wano's political landscape. The other daimyos began to murmur, not in outrage, but in consideration. They saw the logic, the cold, brutal calculus of it, the outsider's power, the princess's legitimacy, the Ona's strength. Forged into one, they would be an unbreakable shield. Naruto felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to him, waiting for his response. He was the final piece of their bizarre equation. He should have refused. He should have laughed in their faces, told them they were insane, and demanded they find him a boat off this crazy island. That's what the old Naruto would have done. But the old Naruto was buried in a different world, alongside his best friend. The man standing here was tired. He was a leader who understood the weight of responsibility, and he saw the path this was heading down. If he refused, the fragile coalition would shatter. The clans would choose sides. Yamato would be seen as an untamable threat. Hiyori is a weak ruler. The Kurozumi would fan the flames, and this beautiful, broken country would tear itself apart. He looked at Hiyori, saw the silent plea for help in her eyes. He looked at Yamato, saw the righteous fury of a soul that had never known freedom. He saw two women about to be put in cages, one of silk and one of steel. And he felt a familiar, weary anger. He took a step forward, his voice cutting through the noise. The council will not be deciding anything tonight. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that silenced the hall instantly. This concerns the three of us. It will be decided by the three of us. Alone. He turned and walked out of the hall, not waiting for a response. The scabbards parted before him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and respect. He had neither accepted nor refused, but he had taken command of the situation. For now, that was enough. He found Hiyori in the moonlit garden where they had first truly spoken. She was standing by the koi pond, her back to him, her shoulders rigid. She did not seem surprised by his arrival. "It is my duty," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the night breeze. "Since the day my father died, my life has not been my own. It has been a tool for the restoration of Wano. If this is the price of a lasting peace, then it is a price I must pay." Naruto came to stand beside her, looking not at her but at the stoic, ancient cherry tree at the garden's center. "I know a little something about being a tool," he said, his voice a low murmur. "For years, I was the Leaf Village's Jinchuriki. A weapon to be pointed, a deterrent to be polished and displayed. They hated me and feared me, but they needed the monster inside me. So they smiled and called me a hero while they kept me in a cage of their own making." Hiyori turned to look at him then, her eyes searching his face in the pale moonlight. "So I fought," Naruto continued, meeting her gaze. "I fought to make them see me. Not the Nine Tails, not the fourth Hokage's legacy, not the child of prophecy. Just Naruto. It's a long, bloody road, trying to convince people you're a person." He paused. "I'm not going to be the one who shoves you back into a cage, Hiyori. No matter what some old man with a beard decides." A single tear traced a silver path down her cheek. It was the first sign of weakness she had allowed herself to show him. "But what if he is right?" she whispered, the words laced with a desperation she could no longer hide. "What if this is the only way? I am so tired of fighting, Naruto-san. I am so tired of being afraid for my people, for my brother." This was the heart of it. Not duty, but fear. A fear born from 20 years of loss and suffering. He saw it now. She wasn't a princess resigned to her fate. She was a survivor at the end of her rope, willing to do anything to make the pain stop. "Then we find another way," he said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. "What do you want? Not the regent, not Odin's daughter. You." The question hung in the air between them, simple and profound. It was a question no one had asked her in 2 decades. She looked at this strange man. This outsider who saw past the kimono and the title to the exhausted woman within, and she felt a flicker of something she had thought long dead. "Hope. I want," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to see the children of Wano grow up without knowing the sound of a factory or the pang of hunger. I want to play my shamisen without having to hide my tears. I want my brother to become a great shogun, a man greater than our father. And she trailed off, unable to give voice to her own selfish, forgotten desires. "Then that's what we'll fight for," Naruto said. "Let me worry about the daimyos. You just worry about being the person they all need you to be." He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "And for what it's worth, the ramen is on me next time." She let out a soft, watery laugh, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to melt away. The proposal still hung over them, a monstrous, impossible thing. But it no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like a problem. And Naruto was a man who solved problems. Finding Yamato was easier. He just followed the sounds of destruction. He found her on the highest roof of the castle keep, methodically, smashing the decorative tilework with Takaru. Each swing was punctuated by a furious yell. A cage, crash, a chain, crunch, a political thing, smash. Naruto hopped onto the roof, landing silently a few feet behind her. You're going to have to pay for that, you know. Yamato spun around, her face a mask of fury. Are you here to try and convince me? To sell me on the honor of being your wife? Nope, Naruto said, sitting down cross-legged on the undamaged part of the roof. He patted the spot next to him. Figured I'd watch the show. You've got a pretty good swing. His casualness seemed to infuriate her even more. Do not mock me. This is about my freedom. Is it? Naruto asked, his tone genuinely curious. What does freedom mean to you, Yamato? She blinked, the question catching her off guard. It means doing what I want. Going where I want. Not being tied down by anyone. Sounds lonely, Naruto observed. Her jaw tightened. Oden was free, and he was the greatest man in the world. Oden had a wife he loved, Naruto pointed out gently. He had retainers who would have died for him. He had children. He chose to be bound to all of them. Then he left them all to go on an adventure because he was selfish. And when he came back, his country was in ruins and his family was in danger. He died trying to fix a mistake that his own freedom created. The words were brutal, a direct assault on the scripture she had built her life around. Yamato recoiled as if struck. You don't know anything about him. I know what I see, Naruto said, his gaze steady. I see a country on the brink of another war. I see Hiyori trying to hold it all together with sheer willpower. And I see you, someone with the power to protect all of them, up here breaking tiles because you're afraid of a word. I am not afraid, she roared. Aren't you? He challenged, standing up to face her. You're afraid of being like your father. He used his power to control people. So you refuse to use yours to help them. Because you think any kind of responsibility is a chain. You're not acting like Oden. You're acting like a kid, running from your father's shadow. Yamato's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Rage, hurt, confusion. No one had ever dared to speak to her like this, to dissect her hero, to dissect her. So what do you want from me? She finally whispered, her voice cracking. I don't want anything from you, Naruto said, his tone softening. I'm offering you something. A partnership. Not a cage. Not a chain. You want to be Oden. Fine. Oden protected Wano. He fought for it. Right now, Wano needs a protector. Someone with the strength to shatter any army that comes to its shores. That's you. He stepped closer, his blue eyes boring into hers. Forget the marriage. Forget the politics. Let's make a different vow. You and me, we protect this place. We protect Hiyori and Momonosuke. We fight anyone who tries to hurt them. It'll be an adventure. Probably a dangerous one. Sounds like just the kind of thing Oden would have jumped into with both feet. He was reframing it, turning an obligation into a quest. He was speaking her language. The fire in her eyes changed from anger to something else. Something uncertain, but intrigued. A partnership? She asked skeptically. The strongest in Wano, he confirmed with a grin. But, I have to know I can count on you. That you're not just all talk. A challenging glint appeared in his eye. So, how about a wager? One more spar. Right here, right now. If you win, I walk into that council hall tomorrow and I tell them to shove their proposal. I'll deal with the consequences. But if I win, you agree to this. You agree to fight for Wano. With me. Yamato looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. He wasn't trying to trick her. He was challenging her, meeting her on her own terms. A slow, wide grin spread across her face, chasing away the last of her anger. This, she understood. You're on, sun hair, she said, hefting her kanabo. But when I win, you're buying me all you can eat Oden for a month. Naruto did not walk into the council hall the next day. Instead, he requested the presence of the daimyos in the courtyard. When they had assembled, he made them an announcement. I will consider the proposal, he said, his voice ringing with a newfound confidence. But a leader who is not accepted by the people is no leader at all. He is a tyrant. I will not be your shogun, and I will not rule from the shadows. I will be a shield for Wano. And a shield must be tested. He declared that he would submit to 3 trials. One for each of the great clans, to prove his worth. The daimyos, taken aback but intrigued by this display of both humility and confidence, agreed. The first trial was set by the Uesugi clan of Udon. A test of wisdom. Naruto was taken to a valley on the border of Udon and Ringo, where 2 villages had been engaged in a bitter, bloody feud over a single, fertile paddy field for nearly a century. He was given 3 days to find a resolution. Naruto didn't consult maps or ancient legal scrolls. He walked into the first village and asked to speak to the oldest resident. He sat with an old woman for hours, not asking about the land, but about her life, her family, her memories. He did the same in the rival village. He learned that the feud wasn't about rice. It began 3 generations ago, when the son of one village chief had been spurned by the daughter of the other. The dispute over the land was just the gravestone of a forgotten love story. On the 3rd day, he brought the 2 current village chiefs to the disputed field. He didn't propose they divide it. Instead, he told them the story he had learned, the story of their own great-grandparents. Then he made his proposal. The field would belong to neither village. It would be a neutral ground, where a new sake brewery would be built, a joint venture between the 2 villages. And the first bar, rel brewed each year, would be used to toast the memory of the 2 young lovers who had started it all. He had not resolved a dispute over land, he had healed a wound of the heart. The 2 chiefs, shamed and moved, agreed. He had shown that he understood the soul of Wano, not just its laws. The second trial was set by the Shimotsuki of Ringo, a trial of strength. A monstrous, boar-like creature, of Kaido's failed experiments with smile fruits that had been abandoned on Onigashima, had made its way to the mainland and was terrorizing the northern coast. It was known as the Onigashima Oni, it was said to have a hide that no sword could pierce. As Naruto prepared to depart, Yamato appeared, Takaru on her shoulder. "This is part of our deal," she said, a challenging grin on her face. "Protecting Wano. This is our first mission as partners. I'm coming with you." Naruto just smiled. Try to keep up. They found the beast in a deforested canyon. It was a grotesque creature, the size of a small house, with mismatched limbs and a furious, singular desire to destroy. The samurai who had been sent to stop it were scattered, their blades broken against its unnatural hide. "His skin is too tough," Yamato yelled over the beast's roar. "We need to hit it from the inside." "Got an idea," Naruto yelled back. "Buy me some time, and try not to get eaten." What followed was a symphony of destruction. Yamato became a white-haired demon, her kanabo a blur as she met the beast's charge head-on. She was a living wall, her strength utterly monstrous as she held the creature at bay, her laughter echoing through the canyon. While she held its attention, Naruto gathered nature energy. His connection was still weak, but he could draw enough. Markings appeared around his eyes. Sage mode. He created 2 shadow clones. Together, the 3 of them began to form a new kind of Rasengan. He poured wind nature chakra into it, shaping it not into a ball, but into a massive, spinning shuriken. Futon. Rasenshuriken. He leapt high into the air as Yamato, with a final, mighty blow, sent the beast staggering back. "Now," she roared. Naruto threw the attack. It flew through the air, a screaming discus of chakra that struck the Oni in its open, roaring mouth. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The Rasenshuriken exploded inside the beast, countless microscopic wind blades severing every cell, every pathway. From the inside out, the creature froze, swelled, and then disintegrated into nothing but dust. They stood in the sudden silence, breathing heavily. Yamato looked from the dust cloud to Naruto, her eyes wide with a new level of respect. "Okay," she panted, a wide grin spreading across her face. "That's a new one. I think this partnership is going to be fun." For the final trial, Hiyori herself escorted him. It was a trial of the heart. She took him to the ruins of Odin's castle, a place of profound sorrow, a scar on the land that had never healed. The air was heavy, cold, and thick with the echoes of rage and despair. "The spirits of my family, and of those who died here, do not rest," she said softly, her voice filled with a lifetime of grief. No one can find peace in this place. Naruto closed his eyes. He didn't try to sense ghosts. He reached out to the world around him. To the twisted trees, the scorched stones, the very air itself. He could feel it, a psychic wound, a lingering miasma of pain left behind by the traumatic events. It wasn't just spirits, the land itself was crying out. He sat in the center of the ruins and entered a deep meditation. He didn't try to fight the sorrow. He opened himself to it. He let the pain of this land wash over him, and he met it with his own. He thought of Jiraiya, of Neji, of his parents, of Kurama. He let his own immense, world-weary grief connect with the grief of this place. Then, he began to speak. Not to Hiyori, but to the silence. He spoke of carrying the will of the fallen. He spoke of how their memory is not a chain that holds you to the past, but a fire that lights the way to the future. He spoke of loss, not as an ending, but as a reason to build something better, something worthy of the sacrifice. He wasn't performing an exorcism. He was offering empathy. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the air began to warm. A gentle breeze sighed through the ruins, carrying the scent of pine and cherry blossoms. The oppressive weight began to lift. Sunlight, for the first time in 20 years, seemed to fall on the scorched stones without being swallowed by the gloom. Hiyori watched, tears streaming down her face. He hadn't used some grand, explosive power. He had used the strength of his heart. He had looked into the deepest wound of her country, of her family, and he had not tried to erase it, but to understand it. He had offered it peace. In that moment, her admiration for him, her respect for him, blossomed into something deeper, something she was not yet ready to name. Naruto stood before the council of daimyos once more. He had passed their trials. He had earned their respect. The hall was silent, waiting. He looked at Hiyori, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He looked at Yamato, who stood with her arms crossed, a look of grudging respect on her face. He had kept his promise to both of them. He had shown them another way. Now, it was time to walk it. I accept the proposal, he announced. His voice clear and steady. The daimyos let out a collective sigh of relief. But not as your weapon or your political tool. I accept it as a man who has come to care for this country and its people. I will make a vow today. Not to this council, but to every citizen of Wano. I vow to protect this land with my life. I will honor the wisdom of Kazuki Hiyori, and I will fight alongside the warrior Yamato. Together, we will be the shield that allows the new shogun to grow, and the dawn to finally break over Wano. His words were not those of a politician, but of a true leader. Sincere, powerful, and resonant. There was no longer any doubt. This was the pillar Wano had been waiting for. That evening, on the eve of the hastily planned but grand ceremony, the three of them stood on the balcony of Hiyori's chambers, looking out over the capital. The city lights twinkled below them like a sea of fallen stars. The tension of the past few days had been replaced by a quiet, uncertain calm. Are you ready for this? Naruto asked, not looking at either of them. It is my duty, Hiyori said softly. But this time, the words were not a lament. They were a statement of fact, spoken with a newfound strength. She looked at Naruto, a hint of a smile on her lips. But perhaps, it will not be such a hardship. As long as I still get to break things, I'm in, Yamato declared, stretching her arms behind her head. And as long as she hooked a thumb at Naruto, remembers who won that spar on the roof. Naruto just chuckled. The path ahead was insane. A political marriage to two women he barely knew. In a strange land with a celestial threat undoubtedly looming somewhere on the horizon. It was the craziest thing he had ever done. But as he stood there, between the graceful princess and the wild Oni warrior, under the unfamiliar stars of a new world, he didn't feel the weight of a burden. He felt the faint, unfamiliar warmth of a beginning. For the first time since he had lost everything, he felt like he might be building something new. He felt like he might be home. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Star Eater's Shadow. The wedding was less a celebration of love and more a grand act of political theater, and everyone in Wano knew it. It was a display of unity, a statement to the restless clans and the watchful world beyond their shores that the age of chaos was over. The flower capital was awash in color and sound. Silken banners bearing the crests of the Kazuki, Shimotsuki, and Uzumaki, a hastily designed but striking red swirl on a field of white, hung from every pagoda. The streets were filled with music, the air thick with the scent of cherry blossoms and roasting mochi. Naruto stood on the dais before the great shrine, feeling profoundly out of place. He was clad in a formal black Monsuki kimono, the fabric heavy and unfamiliar on his shoulders. The Uzumaki swirl was stitched in white over his heart. He felt like a child playing dress-up, a shinobi masquerading as a prince. He looked out at the sea of faces, daimyos, samurai, merchants, farmers, all watching him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He was their shield, their pillar, their gamble. The weight of it was heavier than any mountain. To his left stood Hiyori. She was the vision of a storybook princess, a perfect, beautiful doll in a stunningly intricate white and gold shiromuku. Her face was a mask of serene grace, betraying none of the turmoil he knew she felt. She held herself with the poise of a woman born to this role, a quiet, unshakable pillar of tradition. Yet, when her eyes met his for a brief moment, he saw a flicker of the same uncertainty he felt, and a silent, shared understanding passed between them. "We are in this together." To his right stood Yamato. Getting her into a formal kimono had, according to a beleaguered Kinemon, been a battle worthy of its own epic ballad. She had complained, fidgeted, and threatened to smash the ceremonial sake cask with her kanabo, which now lay propped against the shrine's steps, much to the officiant's horror. She wore a vibrant kimono of deep indigo and fiery red, a compromise that hinted at her warrior spirit. She looked less like a bride and more like a captured storm goddess, her horns adorned with small, golden rings, her expression a mixture of profound boredom and rebellious energy. She caught him looking and gave him a conspiratorial wink, as if to say, "Can you believe this nonsense?" The ceremony was a long, complex ritual of chanted blessings, symbolic offerings, and the solemn drinking of sake from shared cups. Naruto went through the motions, his mind a million miles away. He thought of the simple life he had once imagined for himself back in Konoha, a life of ramen and missions, maybe. A small apartment and the title of Hokage. He had never imagined this. A king in all but name, a husband to two women who were as different as the sun and the moon, in a land that wasn't his own. When it was over, and the roar of the crowd proclaimed them united, he stood between his two wives, a strange, incomplete trinity. Hiyori offered the people a gentle, reassuring smile. Yamato raised a triumphant fist in the air, eliciting a confused but enthusiastic cheer from the assembled warriors. Naruto simply raised his left hand in a small, acknowledging wave, the gesture of a leader who was still learning the shape of his own crown. The days that followed were a delicate, awkward dance. They were given the former shogun's sprawling residential wing in the castle, a space of interconnected rooms, private gardens, and sliding paper screens that offered the illusion of privacy but little of the reality. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Hiyori would sip her tea with perfect etiquette, Yamato would devour a mountain of rice and grilled fish with ferocious gusto, and Naruto would sit between them, feeling like a referee at a match that hadn't quite started. They found their rhythm not in the quiet, domestic moments, but in the council chambers. There, they were a surprisingly effective unit. Hiyori, with her deep understanding of Wano's politics and traditions, was the strategist. Yamato, with her blunt honesty and intimidating presence, was the enforcer, cutting through the daimyos posturing with a well-timed glare. And Naruto was the anchor, the calm center of their storm. He listened more than he spoke. But when he did, his words carried the simple, undeniable weight of experience. He spoke of resource allocation, of supply lines, of morale, the practical, unglamorous business of holding a nation together. The daimyos, who had expected either a puppet or a tyrant, found themselves dealing with something far more potent, competent leadership. It was during one such meeting, a tedious debate over lumber rights in the northern forests, that the first shadow fell. A messenger, his face pale and his kimono spattered with mud from a hard ride, burst into the hall and fell to his knees. "Forgive the intrusion, my lords," he gasped, his voice trembling. "A message from Hakumai. A terrible blight has fallen upon the rice paddies of the K's village. The fields, they turn to gray dust overnight. And the people, they fall into a sleep from which they cannot be woken." A chill silence fell over the council. Hakumai was Wano's breadbasket, its most fertile province. ABLIGHT there was a threat to the entire nation's food supply. Is it a sickness? Lord Uesugi demanded. Have you brought in physicians? We have, my lord, the messenger stammered. The physicians can find no ailment. The sleepers, they are not sick. They are not injured. They simply are not there. Their bodies breathe, but their spirit is gone. Naruto, Hiyori, and Yamato exchanged a look. This was no ordinary plague. This was something else, something unnatural. We will go, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. The decision was instant, unspoken but unanimous among the three of them. This was their first true test as Wano's protectors. Kinemon protested, citing the danger, but their minds were made up. They would not lead from a throne. They would lead from the front. The journey to Hakumai took 2 days. As they left the vibrant greens of the flower capital and entered the agricultural plains, the wrongness began. Naruto felt it first. It was a faint, unsettling hum on the edge of his senses. A feeling he couldn't quite place. It wasn't chakra. It was the absence of it. It was a cold, draining emptiness that felt like the spiritual equivalent of a vacuum. What is it? Yamato asked, noticing the tense set of his jaw. She held the reins of her own horse loosely, her kanabo strapped to her back, her eyes scanning the horizon. The world feels thin here, Naruto said, struggling to find the words. Like the life is being stretched, leached away. As they drew closer to Kei's village, the visual evidence became undeniable. The landscape transformed from lush, green paddies to a desiccated, gray wasteland. The very earth seemed to have been bled of its color and vitality, leaving behind a crumbling, ashen soil that puffed up in clouds of dust with every footstep. The air grew still and silent. No birds sang, no insects chirped. A profound and heavy despair seemed to hang over the land, a tangible presence that weighed on the soul. By the gods, Hiyori whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. She had seen the devastation of war, but this was different. This was a violation of nature itself. They rode into the village. It was a scene of quiet, chilling horror. Farm tools lay where they had been dropped. A half-eaten bowl of rice sat on a doorstep, now covered in a fine layer of gray dust. The village was completely silent, yet it was not abandoned. Through the open doors of the simple wooden houses, they could see the sleeping villagers. They lay on their futons, in their chairs, some even slumped over their tables, their chests rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. They were alive, but they were gone. This is not a sickness, Naruto said, his voice grim. He knelt by an old woman lying peacefully on her porch, her face a placid, empty mask. He tried to feel her life force, her spirit. There was nothing. Just a hollow shell. This is theft. Yamato, usually so loud and boisterous, was subdued, her face a grim mask. She placed a hand on the gray, brittle stalk of a dead rice plant. It crumbled to dust at her touch. Whatever did this, it's hungry. They moved toward the center of the village, the oppressive silence, broken only by the crunch of their own footsteps on the dead earth. At the heart of the village, next to a withered sacred tree, one man was still standing. He was a tall, powerfully built samurai, clad in battered but fine armor. A strange, black, crystalline growth crawled up his left arm and over his shoulder, pulsing with a faint, violet light. His eyes, when he turned to face them, glowed with that same empty, void-like luminescence. He held a katana, its blade coated in the same black crystal. Naruto recognized the man's crest from a briefing. This was Jinbei, a local hero, a swordsman a noun for his unwavering will and his devotion to protecting his village. That will was now gone, replaced by a cold, hollow purpose. You do not belong, the samurai, the corrupted, said. His voice was a discordant chorus, a dozen whispers speaking as one. The great hunger has claimed this place. It is a gift, a peace. You will share in this peace. He raised his sword. The ground around him began to tremble, and the gray dust began to coalesce, rising up to form jagged, sharp spikes. Get behind me, Naruto yelled, shoving Hiyori back as he and Yamato placed themselves in front of her. The corrupted samurai, Jinbei, moved with unnatural speed, his blade a black blur. Yamato met his charge with a roar, Takaru swinging down in a mighty arc. Clang. The sound of their impact was sickeningly dull. The kanabo, which had cracked the castle courtyard, only chipped the crystalline coating on Jinbei's sword. The corrupted was thrown back by the force, but he was unharmed. His power isn't his own, Naruto shouted, dodging a spike of gray earth that erupted from the ground where he'd been standing. Something is fueling him. The fight was a chaotic, desperate affair. Jinbei was relentlessly aggressive, his attacks both physical and spiritual. With every swing of his blade, a wave of palpable despair washed over them, a psychic assault that sought to drain their will, to make them simply give up and lie down. Yamato fought with a savage fury, her brute strength a bulwark against the samurai's attacks, but even she was being slowly worn down. Her movements became sluggish, her roars of exertion sounding strained. "It's draining us," she grunted, blocking a strike that sent a painful jolt up her arms. "Just being near him, it makes me want to sleep." Naruto knew he had to end it quickly. He bit his thumb and slammed his hand on the ground. Summoning jutsu. A plume of smoke erupted, but instead of the great Gamabunta, a small, wheezing, and very confused-looking toad the size of his fist appeared. "Naruto, where are we? The air here tastes terrible." The little toad croaked before vanishing in a puff of smoke. His connection was too weak, the natural energy of the land too corrupted. Plan B. He entered sage mode, the orange markings appearing around his eyes. The world snapped into a new kind of focus. He could see it now. The life force of the land, the natural energy, was being sucked into the corrupted samurai like a whirlpool, drawn to the crystalline growth on his arm as if it were a wound in the world. And from that wound, a different energy was bleeding out. Cold, empty, alien. Yamato. His left arm. That's the source. Yamato needed no other prompting. With a mighty roar, she unleashed her own power. A blast of icy air erupted from her, a technique she called Divine Swiftness, White Serpent. The ground frosted over as she lunged, her kanabo aimed like a spear at Jinbei's corrupted arm. The samurai, sensing the threat, raised his sword to block. But it was a feint. Naruto was already there, a Rasengan swirling in his hand. He appeared under Jinbei's guard, driving the spiraling sphere of chakra directly into the man's chest. The impact was immense. The corrupted was thrown backward, his armor shattering. But it wasn't enough. The crystalline growth pulsed, and the wound from the Rasengan began to seal itself. "It is useless," the chorus of voices whispered from Jinbei's lips. "We are eternal." "No, you're not," Naruto growled, landing beside Yamato. "You're just new." He needed more power. He created a single shadow clone. It was a struggle. His reserves were dangerously low. But it was enough. Together, the two Narutos began to shape his ultimate technique. Wind chakra, sharp and violent, poured into the Rasengan, forming a screaming, four-pointed shuriken of pure energy. "Hiyori, close your eyes," he yelled. Hiyori, who had been watching with a horrified fascination, did as she was told. The sound of the Rasenshuriken was like 1,000 shrieking birds. A noise that hurt the ears and grated on the soul. Naruto didn't throw it. He charged, a golden blur, and thrust the attack directly into the crystalline growth on Jinbei's arm. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a dome of white light erupted, silent and absolute. It wasn't an explosion of force, but of dissolution. Inside the dome, the corrupted samurai looked down at his arm as it disintegrated. Not into blood and gore, but into fine, black dust. A look of peace, of release, crossed his face for a single, fleeting instant. The true Jinbei, buried deep inside, was finally free. Then he, and the dome of light, were gone. Naruto collapsed to one knee, panting, the sage mode markings fading. The Rasenshuriken had taken nearly everything he had left. The press of despair that had hung over the village vanished, leaving behind only a profound, empty silence. "Did we win?" Yamato asked, her voice raspy. "I don't know," Naruto admitted, looking at the barren, gray fields. The land was still dead. The people in the houses were still sleeping. They had killed the symptom, but the disease remained. It was Hiyori who found the source. At the base of the withered sacred tree, half buried in the ashen soil, was a stone. A small, ancient shrine, no bigger than a gravestone. It was covered in carvings, a swirling, chaotic pattern that seemed to hurt the eyes. She knelt, her fingers tracing the faint, almost vanished lines of script carved into its base. The characters were ancient, a precursor to the language of the poneglyphs. She had studied them, in the hidden libraries of the Kozuki clan. "What does it say?" Naruto asked, coming to stand behind her. Her voice was a strained, horrified whisper. "It is a warning. It speaks of a hunger. A Hoshikui, a star eater. A calamity that comes from the void between worlds. It says it was sealed away in the distant past, sealed by a man from the sea. A man who carried the dawn in his laugh. Joy Boy." The name slammed into Naruto's mind with the force of a physical blow. He had heard that name, that story, from the tailed beasts. A legend from a time so ancient it was almost myth. "It's a cycle," he breathed. The terrifying truth settling in his gut. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It's back. They hadn't stumbled upon a random plague. They had stumbled upon the reawakening of an ancient, world-ending evil. The internal politics of Wano, the daimyos, the clans, all of it seemed so impossibly small, so petty, in the face of this. Their victory felt utterly hollow. They had saved no one. They had only learned the name of their executioner. As they stood in the silent, dead village, preparing for the grim journey back to the capital, none of them noticed the small, metallic beetle Chi crawled out from under a rock on a nearby cliff. Its single, glass eye blinked, recording the scene of devastation. Miles away, a man in a nondescript uniform lowered a strange, telescopic device. He tapped the side of the Den Mushi on his wrist, its shell camouflaged to look like a rock. "Observer to Central Command." The man's voice was cold, devoid of emotion, and carried over a secure, crackling line. "Target designation. Wano. Threat level has been escalated. Observed a localized reality fade event and a Class 3 spectral entity. Entity was neutralized by the primary native asset, Naruto. Power output was significant." He paused, looking at his readings. "Recommend immediate deployment of a God Slayer unit for containment and observation. This is no longer just a political matter. We may have a divine entity manifestation on our hands." In the sterile command center on the other end of the line, an officer looked at the report and gave a single, curt nod. The order was given. The world's balance had been disturbed, and the world government was sending its cleaners. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Whispers of the World Government. The return to the flower capital was a somber procession. The news of the horror at K's village preceded them, a wave of cold dread that washed over the capital and extinguished the last embers of the wedding celebration. The dead fields and sleeping villagers were a chilling, incomprehensible mystery to the people of Wano, a land that understood the evils of men but had forgotten the existence of monsters. Naruto, Hiyori, and Yamato stood before the council of daimyos. The great hall feeling more like a funeral parlor than a seat of power. The air was thick with fear. Hiyori, her voice low but steady, recounted what they had found, choosing her words carefully. She spoke of a blight, a strange sickness that had corrupted a noble samurai. She did not speak of the Star Eater, of the void between worlds, or of the name Joy Boy. To speak of such things would be to invite a panic that would shatter the fragile peace. But the daimyos were not fools. They heard the unspoken terror behind her words. "A curse," one of the elder lords from Kibi declared, his face pale. "This is the wrath of the kami for opening our borders to this outsider." He pointed a trembling finger at Naruto. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and venomous. Before Naruto could even react, Yamato took a menacing step forward, her hand gripping Takeru. "Say that again," she growled, her voice a low rumble. "I dare you." "Enough." Hiyori's voice cut through the tension like a whip. "He fought to protect a village of Wano. He stood with us. He is not the cause of this. He is our best hope of understanding it." Her defense was unwavering, and the old lord shrank back, silenced but not convinced. Naruto said nothing. He simply stood there, his presence a silent, unshakable rock. He had faced this before. The fear, the suspicion, the blame. It was the eternal burden of the powerful. But he was no longer a lonely child lashing out at the whispers. He was a leader, and his concern was not for his own reputation, but for the storm that he knew was coming. The Star Eater was not a curse. It was a predator, and it was just getting started. The first reports began to trickle in 2 days later. Small, isolated hamlets in the remote, mountainous regions of Udon. A patch of forest that had turned gray and lifeless. A fishing boat found adrift, its crew in a deep, unbreakable slumber. The blight was spreading, slowly, quietly, like a cancer growing in the marrow of the land. Fear began to give way to a quiet, simmering panic. The daimyos argued, proposing everything from ancient purification rituals to a full-scale quarantine of the affected regions. Wano was turning inward, its old instincts of isolation and suspicion taking hold. It was into this volatile atmosphere that the ship arrived. It was unlike any vessel the people of Wano had ever seen. It was not a pirate ship, nor a merchant vessel. It was a sleek, white ship with no sails, gliding through the water with an unnatural silence. It bore a single, unfamiliar flag, the crest of the world government. It docked at the port of Tokage, not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the quiet confidence of an invited guest. A single man disembarked. He was tall and impeccably dressed in the white uniform of a high-ranking official, his perfectly tailored coat unruffled by the sea breeze. His name, he announced to the wary samurai who met him, was Vice Admiral Kaden, an envoy. Sent on a mission of peace and humanitarian aid. He was charismatic, his smile disarming, his words smooth and reasonable. He was brought to the flower capital and granted an audience with the council. He stood before the daimyos. His posture relaxed, his hands clasped behind his back. He was utterly unintimidated by the grim-faced warriors. Lords of Wano, Regent Hiyori-sama, he began, his voice a pleasant, cultured baritone that filled the hall. The world government extends its deepest sympathies for the tragedy that has befallen your nation. This mysterious plague, this, sleeping sickness, it is a horror we would not wish upon anyone. He paused, letting his words sink in. We have experience with such unnatural phenomena. Our scientists, the finest in the world, have studied similar blights. We believe we can help you. We wish to offer our aid, our physicians, our researchers, our resources, to help you find a cure and restore your beautiful land. His offer was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The daimyos murmured amongst themselves, a current of hope running through them. And what is the price for this aid, Vice Admiral? Hiyori asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Her eyes were sharp, analytical. She had spent 2 decades navigating the treacherous world of politics and power. She knew that nothing was ever free. Kaden smiled, a picture of benevolence. A price, my dear lady, this is an offer of friendship. We ask for nothing in return, save for one small thing. An agreement, a treaty of alliance. Open your borders to us. Allow us to establish a permanent base here to help protect you from future threats. Join the family of nations under the benevolent protection of the world government. In exchange, all of our resources will be at your disposal. It was a masterstroke of political maneuvering. He was offering them a cure for their immediate terror, wrapped in the chains of vassalage. Wano has been closed for centuries, Shimotsuki Yoritomo stated, his voice a low growl. We have our own ways. We do not need the protection of outsiders. With all due respect, Lord Shimotsuki, Kaden countered smoothly, your ways did not protect you from Kaido for 20 years. And they are not protecting you from this plague now. Sometimes, the old ways must give way to a new era of cooperation. We are only here to help. The council was divided. The more pragmatic lords saw the logic in Kaden's offer. The traditionalists saw it as a betrayal of everything Odin had died for. Naruto watched Kaden, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't listening to the man's words. He was watching his eyes, his posture, the subtle tells that betrayed the truth. And beneath the polished, charismatic veneer, he sensed something cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. This was a man who saw Wano not as a nation to be helped, but as a piece on a game board. He was a snake, and he was offering a beautiful, poisoned apple. We will consider your offer, Vice Admiral, Hiyori said, bringing the tumultuous debate to a close. She would not be rushed into a decision that would determine the fate of her country. That evening, the 3 of them gathered in their private chambers. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the decision. We cannot trust him, Yamato said immediately, pacing the room like a caged tiger. The world government is what Odin warned us about. They control everything. They crush anyone who stands in their way. To invite them in is to surrender. But what if they truly can help? Hiyori countered, her expression troubled. She was looking at the reports of the spreading blight, her mind burdened by the responsibility for the sleeping villagers. Can we, in good conscience, refuse any offer of a cure, no matter the source? My ride is not worth the life of a single farmer. It was the core of their dilemma. Ideals versus lives. Freedom versus survival. They both looked at Naruto, who had been silent, staring out the window at the moonlit city. It's a lie, he said simply. What is? Hiyori asked. The cure, he replied, turning to face them. They don't have one. He's lying. I can feel it. He's not here to help us fight the monster. He's here because the monster showed up. Yamato stopped pacing. What do you mean? Think about it, Naruto explained, his mind piecing it all together. This thing, the Star Eater, it's not from this world. It's an outside threat. What if this world government, whatever it is some kind of planetary defense force? They don't see Wano. They see an infection. They see us, you with your dragon blood, me with my whatever I am, as part of the infection. They aren't here to offer a cure. They're here to sterilize the wound. A chilling silence fell over the room as the implication of his words sank in. They weren't being offered a lifeline. They were being offered an executioner's blade, disguised as a surgeon's scalpel. Their argument began then, not out of anger, but out of fear and desperation. Hiyori, ever the pragmatist, still clung to a sliver of hope that they could negotiate, that they could accept the government's help while mitigating the risk. We don't know that for sure, Naruto-san. It is a terrible risk, but to do nothing is also a risk. There is no negotiation with a predator. Yamato shot back, her ideology as inflexible as her kanabo. You show them your throat, and they will tear it out. We must drive them from our shores. And what then? Naruto challenged them both, his voice rising with an intensity that made them flinch. We fight the woe, RLD government with one hand and this shadow monster with the other. Wano will be crushed between them. We need to be smarter than this. The argument escalated, their voices sharp, their differing worldviews clashing. It was their first real fight, a storm of fear, pride, and desperation. Finally, Hiyori, her composure cracking, turned to Naruto, her eyes flashing with a pain that went beyond the political. And what is your solution? Then, she demanded. You see the threats, you see the lies, but what is your grand plan? We cannot fight them both. I don't know yet, Naruto admitted, his own frustration boiling over. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exhaustion. He looked at the two powerful, proud women before him, both looking at him for an answer he didn't have, and the weight of it all, the loss of his world, the burden of this one, crashed down on him. He took a deep breath, forcing the anger down. Shouting wouldn't solve this. He looked from Hiyori's desperate eyes to Yamato's defiant glare. I don't know the plan, he said, his voice quiet again, raw with a sudden vulnerability. But I know we can't do it like this. Arguing, pulling in different directions, that's how we lose. The daimyos are already divided. If the three of us break, Wano breaks with us. He looked at them, his gaze pleading. I trust you, Hiyori, to lead this country. I trust your wisdom, and I trust you, Yamato, to be its strongest shield. I trust your strength. You have to trust me to see the things you can't. He had laid himself bare. Not as a weapon or a symbol, but as a partner. His emotional clarity, his willingness to be vulnerable in a moment of crisis, cut through their anger and fear. They saw him, not as the outsider, but as the pillar holding them together. Hiyori's anger melted away, replaced by a wave of shame. He was right. Yamato looked away, her jaw tight, but her aggressive posture softened. They had failed their first test as a triumvirate. You were right, Hiyori said softly. Forgive me. The fear for my people, it makes me rash. We'll find a way, Naruto said, his voice firm again, his resolve returning. Together, we play his game. We accept his aid. We let him show his hand. And while he's busy trying to trick us, I'll find out what he's really up to. The next day, Kaiden's aid began. He brought a team of scientists in stark, white lab coats. They set up a research camp near the capital, filled with strange, humming technology and gleaming metal instruments. They took soil samples, requested access to the sleeping villagers, and asked endless questions. all under the guise of finding a cure. Kaden, meanwhile, launched a charm offensive. He hosted lavish dinners for the daimyos, plying them with exotic wines and tales of the grand, prosperous world beyond Wano's shores. He spoke of technology that could increase their crop yields tenfold, of weapons that could sink entire fleets. He subtly preyed on their divisions, offering special trade deals to some, promising political backing to others. He was a master of sabotage, framing a rival clan for the spoiling of a granary, planting rumors of treason. The fragile unity Naruto had helped to build began to fray at the edges. Naruto watched it all, his senses on high alert. He could feel the deception, but it was like trying to catch smoke. Kaden was too slick, too careful. He needed proof. He found his chance a few nights later. He used a simple transformation jutsu, a skill so basic he could power it with the barest trickle of chakra, to disguise himself as a common castle servant. He moved through the shadows, a ghost in his own home, and made his way to the wing of the castle that had been given to the vice admiral as his personal quarters. He sensed 2 guards at the door, but they were no match for a shinobi. A flicker of movement, 2 precise chops to the back of the neck, and they were slumped against the wall, unconscious. He slipped inside. The room was Spartan, militaristic. A neatly made bed, a desk with carefully arranged papers, and on the desk, a strange device. It looked like a black snail with a polished metal shell. A den mushi, but unlike any he had seen. It was modified, its shell covered in wires and dials. It was a long-range, encrypted communication device. As he approached, it began to ring, a shrill, electronic tone. Naruto froze. A moment later, a calm, female voice, tinny and distorted, emanated from the device. Report, Vice Admiral Kaden. Has the native asset taken the bait? Naruto's heart pounded. This was it. He stood in the shadows as the door to the adjoining room opened and Kaden stepped out, clad in a silk dressing gown. He looked annoyed at the interruption. He tapped the device. He's suspicious. Kaden's voice was different now, stripped of its charismatic warmth, leaving only cold, clinical precision. But the regent is desperate, and the Oni girl is a predictable fool. They are playing into our hands. The dissension among the daimyos is proceeding ahead of schedule. And the asset's power? The voice asked. It's problematic, Kaden admitted. His energy signature is unlike anything in our databanks. It is not hockey, nor is it related to any known devil fruit. It is biological, but it resonates on a level we have only theorized. The God Slayer project was designed for precisely this type of anomaly. Naruto's blood ran cold. God Slayer. Proceed with Phase 2, the voice commanded. The chaos caused by the spectral entity's expansion should provide you with the perfect cover. Isolate the asset. Test his limits. The Council has authorized the use of the Seraphim unit if necessary. We must have a full profile on his capabilities before the final sterilization protocol is enacted. Understood, Kaden said. The light on the den mushi went out. Sterilization protocol. It was just as he'd feared. Kaden turned from the desk, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. And he found himself face to face with the servant who was supposed to be bringing his evening tea. A servant who was now looking at him with eyes as cold and blue as a winter sea. A servant whose form was now dissolving in a puff of smoke, leaving behind the blonde-haired man who was the subject of his entire mission. Kaden's professional calm finally shattered. A flicker of pure, unadulterated shock crossed his face. Before he could even shout for his guards, Naruto was on him. But Kaden was no mere politician. He was a vice admiral of the world government. His hand moved in a blur, reaching for a small, silver pistol on his bedside table. It wasn't a normal firearm. It hummed with a strange energy. Naruto didn't give him the chance. He closed the distance in an instant. But as his hand reached for Kaden's throat, the vice admiral's body seemed to flicker. Naruto's hand passed through him as if he were a ghost. Hologram. No, something else. Kaden reappeared a few feet away, a strange, technologically advanced suit of shimmering, light-bending armor now materializing around his body. It was sleek, white, and seemed to hum with contained power. You are a bigger fool than I imagined, Kaden said, his voice now a metallic, amplified tone. To confront me directly. A panel on his gauntlet opened, and he fired the silver pistol. It didn't shoot a bullet. It shot a beam of crackling, black energy. Naruto twisted, the beam searing the air where his head had been, leaving a smoking hole in the wall behind him. Naruto's eyes widened. That beam, it hadn't felt like energy. It had felt like the void. Like the Star Eater. It was a weapon designed to negate his power. A chakra killer. The fight was fast and brutal. Naruto, relying on his raw speed and taijutsu, became a golden blur, his fists and feet hammering against the advanced armor. But the suit was incredibly durable, absorbing his blows. Kaden wasn't a skilled fighter, but he didn't need to be. The suit amplified his strength and speed, and his weapons were designed for one purpose: to kill beings like Naruto. He fired beams that drained energy, deployed small drones that exploded with concussive force, and filled the room with a sonic frequency that made Naruto's teeth ache. Naruto realized he couldn't win with brute force. He needed to be smarter. He entered Sage mode, the natural energy of the world flooding his senses, showing him the weaknesses in the suit. The faint energy fluctuations that betrayed its power source. He dodged another black beam and slammed his palm onto the floor. The wooden floorboards erupted, not with a jutsu, but with raw, focused strength, throwing Kaden off balance. In that split second of opportunity, Naruto moved. He formed a Rasengan, pouring sage chakra into it, making it denser, more potent. He didn't aim for the chest plate. He aimed for the small, glowing power core he could now sense on the back of the suit's neck. He slammed the sage art Rasengan into the power core. The suit sparked violently, the light-bending field flickering and dying. Kaden roared in frustration as his armor began to fail. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his suit smoking. "This changes nothing. The world will not tolerate a nation of gods. We will burn this island to the bedrock to maintain order." Before Naruto could finish him, Kaden slammed a button on his gauntlet. A blinding flash of light filled the room. And when Naruto's vision cleared, Kaden was gone. A teleportation device. He had escaped, but he had left something behind. His words. His confession. Naruto stood in the wrecked room. The proof he needed echoing in his ears. He now knew their name. God Slayers. He knew their purpose. Sterilization. And he knew that the game was over. The whispers were done. The war had just begun. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Way of the Shinobi. The truth, when Naruto laid it bare before Hiyori and Yamato, was a cold, clarifying slap. He recounted the conversation he'd overheard, the metallic voice on the Den Den Mushi. The chilling phrases. God Slayer, native acid, final sterilization protocol. Kaden's escape and the wrecked room served as undeniable proof. The world government hadn't come to offer a helping hand. They'd come to amputate a limb they deemed infected. Hiyori's face was a pale, stoic mask, but her white-knuckled grip on the folds of her kimono betrayed her fury. All her cautious diplomacy, her willingness to entertain the devil's bargain for the sake of her people, had been a sham. She had been played, her desperation used as a weapon against her. Yamato's reaction was more visceral. She slammed her fist into a wooden pillar, cracking the ancient timber. Sterilization. She spat the word like poison. "They're just like my father. Anyone who won't kneel, they crush. I say we hunt down their ship and I'll sink it to the bottom of the sea with my own 2 hands." "And then what?" Naruto countered, his voice cutting through her rage. He was calm, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The adrenaline of the fight replaced by a cold, strategic focus. "They'll send 10 more ships. Then 100. They have technology we can't even comprehend. We can't fight them head-on, Yamato. A samurai's duel is honorable, but it's useless against an enemy who will shoot you in the back from a mile away. We can't beat them at their game. So what do we do?" Hiyori asked, her voice heavy with the weight of this new, impossible war. "We cannot fight them, and we cannot trust them. We are trapped." "No," Naruto said, a glint in his eyes she hadn't seen before. It was the sharp, calculating look of a seasoned commander. "We don't play their game. We play mine." He looked between the two of them. The samurai's way is the way of the sword, direct and honorable. God Slayer's way is the way of technology, distant and overwhelming. But there is a third way. The way of the shadow. The way of the shinobi. A new strategy began to form, born from the ashes of their shattered diplomacy. Wano's strength was its warriors, but their methods were antiquated. They were a nation of swords facing an army of cannons. Naruto knew he couldn't give them cannons, but he could give them something better: unpredictability. He would teach them to be ghosts, to turn their enemy's strength into a weakness. He would forge a new kind of weapon for Wano. His first class was a motley, hand-picked crew. He didn't choose the most famous swordsman or the highest-ranking samurai. He chose the outcasts, the overlooked, the ones with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. There was Kenji, a young samurai from a disgraced family, his ambition burning hot to restore his name. He was fast and reckless, his sword style unrefined but full of raw talent. Next was Chiyo, a former member of Orochi's Onawabanshu, the shogun's personal guard of Kunoichi. She had been pardoned but was still viewed with suspicion. Her skills were in stealth and infiltration, her loyalty now fiercely devoted to the new regime that had shown her mercy. He also chose a handful of the younger scabbards, men like Kawamatsu and Raizo, whose unique fighting styles already bordered on the unconventional. And then there was Yamato. She had demanded to be included, her competitive spirit ignited by this strange, new way of fighting. "If you're going to teach people how to be shadows," she'd declared, "then I'm going to be the biggest, loudest shadow you've ever seen." He took them to a secluded, rocky valley in the wilds of Kuri, far from the prying eyes of the capital. Their training began not with weapons, but with the basics: stealth, misdirection, information gathering. He taught them how to walk without sound, how to use the landscape for cover, how to blend into a crowd. He showed them how to create diversions, how to lay simple but effective traps, how to use smoke bombs and caltrops. For the proud samurai, it was a culture shock. "This is cowardice," Kenji protested on the third day, after an exercise where Naruto had assassinated him with a pebble thrown from the shadows for the 10th time. "We should face our enemies head-on, with honor." "Your honor is getting you killed," Naruto replied bluntly, appearing beside him as if from thin air. "Your enemy doesn't have honor. He has a rifle that can put a hole in your chest before you even hear the shot. What is more honorable, to die for your pride, or to swallow it and live to protect your home?" The lesson hit home. They began to learn, to adapt. Chiyo, already skilled in the arts of deception, flourished, helping Naruto bridge the gap between his shinobi techniques and the culture of Wano. Yamato struggled with the concept of subtlety. Her idea of a diversion was to smash a building, but her raw power and enthusiasm were infectious. She excelled at the more destructive aspects, learning how to channel her ice powers into creating slippery traps or flash-freezing watchtowers. Naruto showed them how to adapt their own skills. A swordsman's speed could be used for silent, lightning-fast takedowns. A warrior's strength could be used to create environmental traps, to bring a cliffside down on a patrol. He was not trying to turn them into leaf shinobi. He was helping them evolve into something new: samurai shinobi, a hybrid force perfectly suited to Wano's terrain and its new enemy. While Naruto trained his new unit, the God Slayers, undeterred by Kaiden's exposure, escalated their shadow war. Their hidden base, a technologically camouflaged ship anchored in a cove off the coast of Udon, became the source of Wano's misery. They didn't launch a direct assault. They bled the country with 1,000 small cuts. They used advanced chemical agents to poison reservoirs, making entire villages sick. They sabotaged the newly rebuilt forges in the capital, causing explosions that crippled weapon production. They used sophisticated psychological warfare, projecting ghostly images onto the sea mist. At night, images of Kaido's dragon form, of Odin's execution, to stir up fear and superstition among the populace. Small squads of soldiers in light-bending camouflage armor began to conduct reconnaissance missions deep into the mainland. Wano was beginning to fray. The daimyos were in an uproar, blaming each other, blaming Naruto, blaming the lingering curses of the past. The country was on the verge of the civil war that Kaiden had been sent to foment. It was time for the first mission. "The source of the poison is here," Naruto said, pointing to a spot on a hand-drawn map. He and his team were huddled in a cave, the flickering firelight casting shadows on their determined faces. "A major reservoir that supplies 3 towns in Udon. My toads," he had finally managed to summon a few small Ku toads, have confirmed a recurring patrol of 5 soldiers in invisible armor. They approach the reservoir every night at the same time. They are methodical, predictable. We're going to use that against them. The plan was simple, a classic shinobi ambush. Chiyo, using her stealth skills, would scout their approach and confirm their numbers. Kenji and the other samurai would prepare a pitfall trap on the path, covered by a genjutsu-laced paper seal that would make it look like solid ground. Yamato would be the hammer. That night, under a sliver of moon, the plan went into motion. Chiyo, a shadow among shadows, gave a silent bird call signal. The patrol was approaching. Naruto watched them through a small spyglass. 5 soldiers, their forms shimmering like heat haze, moved with militaristic precision. They walked right into the trap. The genjutsu held, and the ground gave way beneath them. 4 of the 5 soldiers fell into the 10-foot pit, their armor flickering as the IM pact momentarily disrupted the camouflage. The 5th, their leader, was quicker, leaping back just in time. Before he could raise his weapon, Chiyo was on him, her kunai at his throat. He froze. That was Yamato's cue. With a roar that was more animal than human, she leapt from the cliffs above, her kanabo held high. Thunder Bagua, she screamed, adding Odin's flair to her own attack. She brought the massive club down not on the soldiers, but on the cliff face beside the path. The rock shattered. An avalanche of stone and earth thundered down, burying the pit and the 4 soldiers within it. It was brutal, overwhelming, and terrifyingly effective. They took the leader prisoner. Under the influence of a mild truth serum Chiyo had concocted from local plants, he revealed the location of their base, the hidden cove. The camouflaged ship. He also revealed that they were a small, forward operating unit. The main invasion force, the God Slayer fleet, was still a week away, waiting for the country to be sufficiently destabilized. They had a target, and they had a deadline. The assault on the God Slayer's base was a far more complex operation. It was a fortress of advanced technology, protected by sensors, automated defenses, and a full company of elite soldiers. A frontal assault, even with Yamato's power, would be suicide. They had to be ghosts. Raizo the Mist, with his ability to use scrolls for infiltration. And Chiyo, with her stealth, would be the primary insertion team. Their job was to disable the ship's external sensors and plant explosive tags on the engine core. Kenji and his team of samurai shinobi would create a diversion, a series of coordinated attacks on supply depots and watchtowers on the mainland opposite the cove, drawing the bulk of the enemy forces away from the ship. Naruto and Yamato would be the main assault. A diversion. Yamato had protested. You want me to sneak? I don't sneak, I smash. You will, Naruto had told her, a grin on his face. But you'll smash the right thing at the right time. We're going to go right through the front door. Or, close enough. Their insertion method was insane. Yamato, using her ice powers, created a massive, solid ramp of ice that stretched from the cliffs overlooking the cove, arcing high into the air. Naruto, with Yamato riding on his back, ran up it. They were a golden blur against the night sky, a human cannonball aimed at the command deck of the hidden ship. They crashed through the main viewport in an explosion of glass and ice. They landed in the heart of the ship's bridge, a room filled with holographic displays and shocked-looking technicians. Delivery. Yamato roared, hopping off Naruto's back and sweeping the bridge with a single, massive swing of her kanabo, reducing the advanced consoles to sparking scrap metal. The ship's internal alarms blared. Soldiers in white armor flooded the corridors. The fight was on. It was a clash of 2 worlds. The soldiers had laser rifles, grenades, and tactical precision. Naruto and Yamato had raw, overwhelming power. Naruto was a whirlwind of motion, his shadow clones appearing and disappearing, his Rasengan carving through armored soldiers. Yamato was a force of nature. Her kanabo shattering bulkheads, her ice-based attacks freezing entire corridors, turning the pristine, white ship into her own personal frozen fortress. On the mainland, the diversion was working perfectly. Kenji and his team, using their new skills, were wreaking havoc, their hit-and-run attacks making their small force seem like an army. They struck and vanished, before the God Slayers could even get a lock on them. In the bowels of the ship, Raizo and Chiyo reached the engine room. They placed their explosive tags, their movements silent and precise. Their mission was complete. On the bridge, Naruto finally came face to face with the base commander. It was the cyborg from the capital, his body now repaired and upgraded. He stood amidst the wreckage of his command center, his face a cold, metallic mask of fury. The asset, the cyborg, whose designation was Unit 734, stated, his voice a cold, synthetic monotone. Your actions are illogical. You are aligning yourself with an archaic, failed state. We are the future. We bring order. Your order is a cage, Naruto shot back, dropping into a fighting stance. And I'm sick of cages. Their rematch was brutal. Unit 734 had adapted. He had analyzed the data from their first fight. His movements were faster, his attacks more precise. He deployed an energy shield that could deflect a Rasengan. He had learned. But so had Naruto. You see me as just raw power, Naruto said, dodging a series of precise laser blasts. That's your mistake. You think you can analyze me, predict me. But you can't predict a knucklehead. He created a dozen shadow clones. They swarmed the cyborg, a chaotic, unpredictable assault from all directions. While Unit 734 was busy disintegrating the clones, the real Naruto was gathering nature energy. The orange markings of Sage Mode flared around his eyes. He didn't form a Rasengan. He didn't need to. He appeared directly behind the cyborg, his hand outstretched. A frog Kata strike, an invisible punch of pure natural energy. It bypassed the shield entirely, striking the cyborg's internal mechanisms. Unit 734 froze, sparking violently. Error. Critical. System. Failure. His monotone voice glitched. Order this, Naruto said, before delivering a final, devastating kick that sent the cyborg crashing through the far wall and into the sea. Just then, a series of muffled explosions rocked the ship from deep within. Raizo and Chio's tags had detonated. The ship groaned, its lights flickering and dying. It began to list heavily, smoke pouring from its engine room. Time to go, Naruto said. Grabbing Yamato, they leapt from the shattered bridge, landing on an ice slide Yamato had already created, and surfed their way back to the mainland as the God Slayer's hidden fortress began its slow, final descent into the dark waters of the cove. They regrouped with their team in the forest, watching the last of the ship disappear beneath the waves. They were bruised, exhausted, but they were victorious. They had faced a technologically superior foe and had won, not with brute force, but with cunning. Kenji looked at Naruto, his eyes shining with a respect that bordered on hero worship. The way of the shinobi, he breathed. I understand now. They had won the battle. The forward base was destroyed. But the victory felt temporary, a brief respite. They had cut off the head of the snake. But its body was still out there, slithering toward them. As they made their way back to the capital under the first rays of dawn, Hiyori met them on the road. She must have ridden through the night. Her eyes took in their ragged state, the new confidence in Kenji's posture, the triumphant grin on Yamato's face, and the quiet, weary resolve in Naruto's. She walked up to him, her expression unreadable. She reached out and gently brushed a smudge of soot from his cheek. Her touch was light, but it sent a jolt through him. I heard the explosions from the capital, she said softly. Just some spring cleaning, Naruto replied with a tired smile. You have given Wano a new weapon, she said, her gaze sweeping over his new unit. A new hope. She looked back at him, a deep concern and a burgeoning admiration in her eyes. But every battle takes its toll, Naruto-san. Even on you. He just nodded, too tired to speak. He knew she was right. They had won, but he was one man. The God Slayers were an army. And beyond them, the Star Eater's shadow still lingered, a far greater threat, patiently waiting, growing, and feeding on the dying light of the world. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Heart of the Dragon. With the God Slayer's forward base reduced to an artificial reef at the bottom of a forgotten cove, a fragile, almost surreal peace settled over Wano. The sabotage stopped. The ghostly apparitions vanished from the sea mist. The insidious chemical agents polluting the water dissipated, and the sickened villagers began to recover. Though the gray, dead fields, and the sleeping victims of the Star Eater's touch remained a stark, chilling reminder of the greater threat, the immediate pressure had been lifted. It was a lull in the storm, a moment to breathe, and in that quiet space, the lives of Wano's new ruling trinity began to truly intertwine. The castle, once a stage for their political maneuvering and desperate war councils, started to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. The awkward, silent breakfasts gave way to lively debates. Yamato would recount her morning patrols, which usually involved testing the structural integrity of some ancient landmark, while Hiyori would wryly detail the diplomatic headaches these patrols caused. Naruto found himself in the unexpected role of mediator, a calm center in their whirlwind of personalities. His easygoing humor often diffusing their arguments before they could truly begin. He saw new sides to them, layers that were hidden beneath the titles of princess and Oni. He took Hiyori out of the castle, not as the regent, but as a friend. Dressed in the simple clothes of commoners, they explored the bustling markets of the flower capital. He showed her the simple joy of haggling with a street vendor, of sharing a stick of freshly grilled dango, of listening to the laughter of children in the streets. For Hiyori, who had spent her life either in the gilded cage of royalty or the shadowed cage of a courtesan's identity, it was a revelation. She saw the Wano she was fighting for not as a political entity, but as a living, breathing community of people. In turn, she began to him the shamisen in the quiet evenings, the soft, melancholic notes filling their chambers. In those moments, he wasn't a warrior. He was just a man, listening to a beautiful song, a quiet piece set tling in his soul for the first time in a long time. His time with Yamato was a different kind of peace, a loud, chaotic, and exhilarating one. Their spars became a regular occurrence, a form of communication more honest than any words. Their battles were no longer just clashes of power, but intricate dances. He taught her to refine her monstrous strength, to anticipate, to use her opponent's momentum. She, in turn, forced him to rely on his instincts, her wild, unpredictable style a constant, thrilling challenge. Their training sessions often devolved into laughter-filled collapses of exhaustion. The two of them lying on their backs in a crater of their own making, staring up at the clouds. He saw past the bluster and the Odin persona to the woman beneath, passionate, fiercely loyal, and carrying a deep, unhealed wound from a childhood of abuse and isolation. He didn't try to fix her. He just met her on her own terms, offering a respect and a partnership she had never known. The people of Wano saw it, too. They saw the three of them, not just as rulers, but as a unit. They saw Hiyori's wisdom tempered by Naruto's pragmatism. They saw Yamato's wild strength given purpose and direction. The triad that had been a political necessity was, against all odds, becoming a genuine bond. It was during this period of calm that Yamato, growing more confident in her place, suggested a trip. The southern isles of Udon, she announced one morning, stabbing a piece of fish with unusual vigor. They're mostly uninhabited. Odin wrote about them in his journal. He said the oldest parts of Wano are there, places where the dragons still sleep. Hiyori was hesitant, but Naruto was intrigued. The Star Eater's power felt like an anti-life force, a corruption of nature. Yamato's dragon abilities felt primal, deeply connected to the world. He had a hunch that understanding one might be the key to fighting the other. The journey south was a welcome escape. They sailed on a small, fast ship, leaving the politics and the shadows of the capital behind. The islands were beautiful, wild, and untouched, towering, mist-shrouded mesas of black rock, covered in ancient, gnarled forests. It felt like a land forgotten by time. They made camp on the largest of the islands, a place the old maps called Ryujin's Peak. As they explored a deep, hidden valley, they found it, a temple, so old it seemed to have grown from the rock itself. It wasn't a grand, man-made structure, but a series of interconnected caves, their walls covered in faded, intricate carvings. The air within was still and heavy, humming with a latent, dormant power that made the hair on Naruto's arms stand up. The carvings told a story. They depicted not the tyrannical blue dragon Kaido, but majestic, celestial dragons with flowing manes and serpentine bodies. Soaring among the clouds, they were shown as guardians, partners to the early people of Wano, beings of immense natural power. "My father," Yamato said, her voice hushed whisper as she traced the outline of a great, horned dragon that looked strikingly like her own hybrid form. "He always told me his power was a gift from a demon god. That it made him a monster. He tried to beat it out of me, to make me normal. He was wrong," Hiyori said softly, her eyes wide with wonder at the carvings. This is not demonic. This is divine. As they ventured deeper into the temple, the dormant energy grew stronger. It resonated with Yamato, causing the air around her to crackle with faint sparks of frost and lightning. It was in the central chamber that they found the source, a massive, geode-like stone. Split in two, its crystalline interior pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. And it was there that the Star Eater's influence, dormant but ever watchful, chose to strike. It didn't manifest as a physical monster. It came as a whisper. A cold, insidious thought that slithered into the quietest, most vulnerable corners of Yamato's mind. They fear you. Yamato stumbled, a hand flying to her temple. What? Like he did. Your father. He knew what you were. A monster. A calamity. No, she gasped, her breathing growing ragged. The shadows in the chamber seemed to deepen, to coalesce. Naruto and Hiyori spun around, their senses screaming. The temperature in the cave plummeted. Frost, black and sharp as obsidian, began to creep across the floor, emanating from Yamato. Yamato, what's wrong? Naruto asked, taking a step toward her. Stay back, she yelled, her voice distorted, echoing with a cold, alien resonance. Her eyes began to glow with a faint, violet light, the same empty luminescence he had seen in the corrupted samurai. Her power, once a wild but joyful force, was now surging, unstable and terrifying. The air crackled around her, and her horns seemed to grow longer, sharper. They want to use you. A weapon, a shield, just another chain. It's lying to you, Yamato. Fight it. Hiyori cried out, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. But the poison was already in her heart, feeding on the deepest insecurities her father had spent a lifetime cultivating. Her fear of being a monster, of being a tool, of being chained, it was all being twisted into a weapon against her. In the ancient script on the walls around the geode, Hiyori's frantic eyes found a passage. It described a ritual, a dangerous process of harmonization for those of the dragon bloodline whose power became unstable. It required two anchors, one to ground the spirit, and one to channel the raw energy. The final line of the passage was a grim warning: to fail is to shatter the soul, severing the bond to the celestial guardian forever. Naruto-san, Hiyori called out, her voice strained. The writings, there is a ritual, a way to help her. But it's dangerous. It could take her power away. Yamato heard her. The idea of losing her power, the very thing that made her strong, that connected her to Odin, was the final push. The Star Eater's whisper became a roar in her mind. See, they want to make you weak. To tame you. With a scream that was half human, half beast, she unleashed her power. A devastating wave of black ice and negative energy exploded outward. But before it could consume them, a new figure appeared in the chamber's entrance, a silhouette against the daylight. It was a man, old and wizened, his back stooped with age but his eyes sharp and clear. He wore the simple robes of a hermit and carried a single, unadorned sheathed sword. He moved with an impossible, flowing grace. He didn't try to block the wave of dark energy. He drew his sword, and in a single, fluid motion, he cut it. He didn't cut the ice or the energy, he seemed to cut the very air, creating a line of nothingness that the attack simply flowed into and vanished. The child of the calamity has awoken, the old man said, his voice a calm, steady rasp. And the shadow feeds on her fear. You must be her anchors. It was the sword saint of Ringo, a legendary Figu. Ryu was said to have vanished 50 years ago, a man whose skill was rumored to have surpassed Odin himself. He had been living here, as the temple's guardian. And he had been corrupted. The same black crystal that had covered Jinbei now crept up his sword arm, his devotion to the temple twisted into a devotion to the Star Eater. She belongs to the Great Hunger now, the sword saint said, his eyes glowing with that same empty light. He raised his blade, its edge seeming to warp the very air around it. I will silence the voices that distract her. He wasn't aiming for Yamato. He was aiming for Naruto and Hiyori. The fight was unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced. The sword saint was not just a master of the blade, his connection to the Star Eater allowed him to manipulate space itself. His slashes didn't just cut. They erased. He would swing, and a line of reality would simply vanish, forcing Naruto to dodge not a blade, but the void itself. We can't beat him, Naruto yelled, A thin line of blood on his cheek where a near miss had erased a sliver of air right next to his skin. We have to help Yamato. It was Hiyori who made the choice. She ran, not away from the fight, but toward the pulsating geode. I will be her anchor. You must protect us. Naruto understood. He planted his feet, his choice made. He created a dozen shadow clones, not to attack, but to form a Ving wall between the Sword Saint and the women. The Sword Saint carved through the clones with contemptuous ease, each one vanishing into the void his blade left behind. But they did their job. They bought her time. Hiyori placed her hands on the glowing crystal. She closed her eyes and reached out, not with power, but with her heart. She didn't try to command Yamato. She spoke to her thoughts a clear, calm bell in the storm of Yamato's mind. I am not your jailer, Yamato-san. I am your friend. We are not your chains. We are your family. Meanwhile, Naruto faced the Sword Saint alone. He knew he couldn't dodge forever. He had to get inside the Saint's guard. He entered Sage mode, the world slowing down, the lines of energy, both natural and unnatural, becoming clear to him. He saw it. The void cuts were not instantaneous. For a fraction of a second before each cut, a line of cold energy would form. He could predict it. He charged. He weaved through a storm of spatial cuts, a deadly dance on the edge of oblivion. The Saint's eyes widened slightly in surprise at his speed and precision. For the first time, he was being pushed back. Inside her mind, Yamato was drowning in darkness. But Hiyori's voice was a single point of light. A memory surfaced. Naruto, challenging her, not to control her, but to be his partner. Hiyori, laughing at her terrible jokes. The three of them, standing on the balcony, not as rulers, but as something more. What do you want, Yamato? A voice asked in her mind. It was her own. To be a cheap copy of a dead man. Or to be yourself. She remembered Naruto's challenge. You're not acting like Odin. You're acting like a kid, running from your father's shadow. He was right. She was not Odin. She was not Kaido. She was Yamato. With a final, guttural roar, she pushed back. Get out of my head. In the cave, the black frost shattered. The violet light in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by her own fierce, crimson gaze. Her power surged, no longer chaotic and dark, but controlled. Focused, and brighter than ever. Her dragon form manifested, but it was different. It was sleeker, more majestic, wreathed not in black ice, but in pure, white lightning. She had not severed her bond. She had reforged it. She had embraced her heritage, not as a curse, but as her own strength. The Sword Saint faltered, his connection to her fear severed. That was the opening Naruto needed. He didn't use a Rasengan. He used a simple, powerful punch, infused with all the sage chakra he could muster. He struck the corrupted arm, and the black crystal shattered like glass. The old man crumpled, the empty light fading from his eyes, leaving only a tired, ancient confusion. Yamato, Naruto, and Hiyori stood together, panting, in the center of the now peaceful chamber. The battle had been short, but it had been fought for the highest of stakes, a person's very soul. Yamato looked at her hands, at the controlled power crackling around her fingertips. She looked at Hiyori, whose hands were still on the geode, her face pale with exhaustion. She looked at Naruto, who gave her a tired but proud grin. Sorry about the mess, Yamato said, her voice rough with emotion. It's all right, Hiyori replied, her own voice trembling slightly. We're just glad you're back. Yamato walked over to them. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed one hand on Naruto's shoulder and one on Hiyori's. A silent vow, a partnership, no longer of convenience, but of true, forged in fire loyalty. Their trinity was no longer just a political arrangement. It was a bond. As they stood on the shore, preparing to leave the island, they looked back at Ryujin's peak, then out at the sea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The calm had been shattered. The true nature of their enemy revealed more clearly than ever. The final battle was no longer a distant threat on the horizon. It was here. It was inside them. And it was coming for them all. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Siege of the Flower Capital. The peace did not last. It was a fragile, sun-drenched memory, shattered by the mournful, echoing cry of the lookout gongs from the highest towers of the capital. It was a sound that had not been heard since Kaido's reign, a deep, resonant peal that spoke of an existential threat, of an enemy at the gates. From the balconies of the shogun's castle, they could see it. It was not an army of ships, but a tide of wrongness that crept over the land. The horizon to the east, where the fertile plains of Hakumai lay, was stained with a creeping, monochromatic gray. It was a dead zone, a moving frontier of the Star Eater's influence, and at its vanguard marched an army. They were a legion of nightmares. Corrupted samurai in armor that pulsed with a violet sickness. Their movements jerky and unnatural. Grotesque beasts, twisted mockeries of Wano's native fauna, their flesh a latticework of black crystal and their eyes glowing with a malevolent, empty light. At their head marched a council of beings that radiated a palpable aura of despair. The sword saint Naruto had fought, now fully restored by his master's power, stood beside a hulking, four-armed brute that had once been a sumo champion, and a woman whose form seemed to shift like smoke, her whispers carrying on the wind, promising the sweet peace of oblivion. Was the Star Eater's answer to their defiance, a direct, overwhelming assault. As the capital erupted into a frantic scramble of alarm bells and shouting samurai, a second gong cry echoed from the west. From the watchtowers overlooking the sea. This one was different, higher pitched, faster. It spoke of a different kind of enemy. A fleet. Dozens of sleek, white ships, cutting through the waves with silent, predatory grace. They were a perfect, unnerving V formation, and at their center was a vessel that dwarfed the others, a behemoth of white steel and dark glass, its bow shaped like the blade of a guillotine. The God Slayers had returned. Kaiden's failed gambit had been replaced by the final, brutal solution, overwhelming force. They were caught. A pincer movement from hell, a supernatu. Rawl tied on one side and a technological juggernaut on the other. Wano, the land that had prided itself on its impenetrable borders, was about to be crushed. The Great Hall was a maelstrom of controlled panic. The daimyos were on their feet, shouting, arguing, their faces pale with a terror none of them had known even under Kaido's tyranny. The tyrant could be fought, could be understood. This was a two-headed god of death, and it had come to erase them. We must retreat to the mountains. Lure them into the interior. Lord Uesugi yelled, his pragmatism giving way to desperation. Flee. We are samurai of Wano. Shimotsuki Yoritomo roared back, his hand gripping his katana. We will meet them on the field and die with honor. There is no honor in extinction. Naruto stood on the dais beside Hiyori and Yamato, letting the storm of fear wash over the room. He let them shout, let them feel the full, crushing weight of their impending doom. Only when their voices had begun to crack with hopelessness did he speak. Enough. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the din like a blade. The hall fell silent, every eye turned to him. In his gaze, there was no fear, only a calm, chilling focus. He was no longer the stranger, the guest, the reluctant prince consort. He was the commander, and this was his war. Lord Shimotsuki is right, he began, his words surprising the old samurai. We will not flee. This city is the heart of Wano. If it falls, the country's spirit breaks. We will make our stand here. He then turned his gaze to Uesugi. But you are also right. To face them head-on in the old way is suicide. We are outnumbered and outgunned on two fronts. He stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over every man in the room, holding their gaze, forcing them to see his resolve. So we will not fight one battle. We will fight four. He gestured to a massive map of the capital and its surroundings that had been unrolled on the floor. The eastern gate will face the corrupted, he said, his voice ringing with authority. They are a tide of bodies and despair. They require a wall of pure, unshakable strength to break them. Yamato, who had been vibrating with barely contained battle lust, stepped forward. She didn't speak. She just slammed a fist into her open palm, a wide, predatory grin spreading across her face. The message was clear. The wall would hold. The enemy to the west, the God Slayers, will attack from the sky, Naruto continued, his finger tracing a line from the coast to the capital. Their warships are their greatest advantage. So I will take the sky myself. I will be our air force. Quote, the city itself will be a battlefield, he went on, turning his gaze inward on the map. Panic will be our enemy as much as any soldier. We need a heart for our defense. Someone to command the reserves, to organize the civilians, to ensure the flow of supplies and medical aid, to be the voice that reminds us what we are fighting for when all seems lost. Hiyori. Hiyori met his gaze and gave a single, firm nod. Her face was grim but resolute. This was her role. She would be the city's soul. Finally, Naruto said, his eyes finding the small group of shinobi he had trained. Standing ready in the corner of the hall, an army is not just a body. It has a nervous system. The corrupted are led by that council of powerful entities. The God Slayers have a command structure. My shinobi will be the scalpel. You will move through the shadows of this battle. You will not engage the main force. You will sever the head of the snake. Kenji, Chio, you will lead. The young samurai and the former kunoichi straightened, their faces set with a grim determination. They understood their mission. High risk, high reward. The plan was audacious. It was desperate. It was a strategy that stretched their limited forces to the breaking point. But as Naruto finished, a new feeling had settled over the hall. The chaotic fear had been replaced by a sharp, focused resolve. He had given them more than a plan. He had given them a purpose. The samurai of Wano will hold the walls, Naruto concluded, his voice a low, powerful growl that resonated in every chest. Let them come. Let them break themselves upon the heart of this nation. For Odin. For Wano. A single, unified roar answered him, shaking the very pillars of the castle. The time for talk was over. The battle began with a scream. Not a human scream, but the shriek of tortured metal as the first salvos from the God Slayer fleet tore through the air. They weren't aimed at the castle, but at the outer walls. The first line of Wano's defense. Explosions of white-hot plasma turned ancient stone to molten slag. On the eastern gate, the tide of corrupted surged forward, a wave of chittering, moaning monstrosities. And at the gate, Yamato stood alone. She had sent the samurai defenders to reinforce other sections of the wall. This gate was hers. She was in her full dragon hybrid form, a being of terrifying grace and power. White scales covered parts of her body, her horns were long and sharp, and a crackling aura of pure, cold energy wreathed her. She held Takaru in one hand, its spiked head coated in a thick layer of magical frost. I am Kazuki Odin, she roared, her voice booming over the battlefield, a defiant challenge to the encroaching darkness. And you are trespassing. She met the first wave head-on. She was not a defender. She was a natural disaster. Her kanabo was a blur, each swing sending dozens of corrupted flying, their twisted bodies shattering like glass. She breathed a torrent of pure, freezing energy. Namuji Hyoga. That flash froze 100-yard swath of the enemy, turning them into a forest of grotesque ice sculptures. She was a whirlwind of white and blue, a I God holding back the tide of hell itself, her wild, joyful laughter echoing over the screams of her enemies. While Yamato was the unbreakable wall, Naruto's shinobi were the unseen dagger. As the main battle raged, Chio led a small team through the ancient, forgotten sewer tunnels beneath the city. They emerged like wraiths deep behind the corrupted army's front lines, the stench of death and decay thick in the air. Their target was the shifting, smoke-like woman who was whispering her despair-inducing poison into the wind. Her influence was a tangible wave of lethargy and fear that was beginning to erode the morale of the samurai on the walls. Now, Chio whispered. Her team moved. They threw a volley of smoke bombs, not standard smoke, but a special blend mixed with flash powder and chakra-disrupting dust. The area was engulfed in a swirling, disorienting cloud. The smoke woman hissed in annoyance, her form solidifying slightly as she tried to disperse the smoke. That was the opening. Kenji, his face set in a grim mask, burst from the cloud. He was not a silent assassin. He was a lightning strike. His blade, imbued with a simple wind nature jutsu Naruto had taught him, sang through the air. Heron's flash. He screamed, his new confidence forged into his old style. His blade passed through the woman's neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a thin, silver line appeared on her smoky form. She let out a silent, surprised gasp, and her body dissolved, not into smoke, but into nothingness. The oppressive wave of despair vanished instantly, and the samurai on the nearby walls let out a ragged, relieved cheer. Their spirits renewed. One head of the snake was severed. High above the chaos, Naruto became a golden comet. He shot into the sky, the nine truths-seeking orb. forming a protective halo behind him as he entered Six Paths Sage mode. Below him, the God Slayer's ships formed a pristine, orderly grid, an image of cold, technological perfection. They began to fire, a storm of plasma bolts and laser beams that filled the sky. Naruto was a ghost in the storm. He moved with impossible speed, a blur that their advanced targeting systems couldn't track. He held out his hand, a Rasenshuriken, massive and screaming, forming in an instant. He flung it not at the smaller ships, but at the flagship, the behemoth at the center. Sage Art. Magnet Release Rasengan. The attack struck the flagship. But it didn't explode. A powerful energy shield, shimmering with hexagonal patterns, flared to life, absorbing the blow. The ship barely shuddered. A voice, amplified and synthetic, boomed from the flagship, audible even over the roar of battle. Your power is quantifiable, Asset Naruto. Your patterns are predictable. This engagement is a data-gathering exercise. Arender and your people will be granted a swift, painless sterilization. A hatch opened on the top of the flagship, and a figure rose to meet him. It was Unit 734, the cyborg commander. His body had been completely rebuilt. He was larger, his armor a gleaming, obsidian black, and 4 powerful, mechanical limbs, like a spider's, sprouted from his back, each ending in a different, deadly-looking weapon. My diagnostics indicate a 97.4% probability of your termination in this engagement, the cyborg stated, his voice devoid of emotion. I hate math, Naruto shot back, charging. Their battle was a spectacle of light and fury that dwarfed the conflict below. Naruto's Rasenshurikens clashed against the cyborg's energy shields. Unit 734's spider limbs fired a constant, coordinated barrage of laser beams, plasma cannons, and chakra-negating projectiles. He had studied Naruto, learned his moves, and designed himself to be the perfect counter. He was cold, logical, and brutally efficient. The demigods clashed in the sky and on the walls. Hiyori fought her own, quieter war in the heart of the city. She stood in the main square, which had been converted into a massive triage center. She was not panicking, not shouting. Her voice was a calm, steady anchor in a sea of fear. When a runner brought news that the western wall was about to break, she didn't send her precious reserve of samurai. She sent 100 civilians armed with buckets of oil from the kitchens, telling the defenders to slick the ramparts. When a fire broke out in the merchant district, she organized a bucket brigade, her own hands soft from years of playing the shamisen, becoming raw as she helped pass the water. She moved through the crowds of terrified citizens, her presence a balm on their frayed nerves. She held the hands of the wounded, gave water to the exhausted defenders, and rallied the flagging spirits of the volunteer medics. She reminded them of the Wano they were fighting for, the homes, the families, the future. She was not a warrior of steel, but her will was the unbending spine of the city's defense. She was Kazuki Hiyori, and she would not let her father's city fall. The tide began to turn. The battle had raged for hours, and Wano was bleeding. On the eastern gate, Yamato was a titan, but even titans can tire. She stood on a mountain of shattered corrupted, her breathing ragged, her body covered in a dozen minor wounds. The corrupted army was endless. The wall had been breached in 3 other places. The city was being flooded. In the sky, Naruto was locked in a brutal stalemate. Unit 734 was a perfect machine, adapting to his every move. The cyborg sacrificed one of his mechanical arms to trap Naruto's leg, and then fired a point-blank plasma blast that sent him careening down, crashing into the roof of the castle keep in a shower of splintered wood and tile. The God Slayer's flagship began to glow. A massive cannon, the ship's entire bow, was charging, its energy Y-core whining with a sound that promised annihilation. It was aimed at the castle, at the heart of the city. This was the all-is-lost moment. The walls were breached. Their champion in the sky was down. The enemy was charging its superweapon. Despair, more potent than any corrupted, began to seep into the hearts of the defenders. Hiyori, standing in the blood-soaked square, saw the glowing cannon in the sky. She saw the terror on the faces around her. She knew this was the end. Unless, she thought of the stories her mother had told her, of a secret, forbidden Kazuki art. The art of the voice of the people. A technique to channel the collective will, the very soul of Wano. It was a myth, a desperate prayer. And it had a terrible cost. She ran to the castle's highest, most intact balcony, the one overlooking the entire city. She closed her eyes. "Hear me," she whispered, not with her voice, but with her spirit. "People of Wano, lend me your strength, your hope, your rage, lend me your will to live." Something shifted. A faint, golden light began to emanate from her. Across the city, the people, the defenders, the wounded, they felt it. A pull, a connection. They looked to the cast. And saw the golden light of their princess, and they poured their hearts out to her. Their hope, their fear, their love for their home, it all flowed into her. Yamato, staggering on the wall, felt the surge of warmth. She looked to the castle and understood. Her own celestial dragon power, the life force of the land itself, resonated with it. She raised her kanabo to the sky, not as a weapon, but as a conduit. "Take it," she roared. "All of it." A torrent of pure, white gold energy, the very heart of the dragon god, flowed from her, soaring through the air and merging with Hiyori's golden aura. Naruto pulled himself from the wreckage of the roof, his body screaming in protest. He saw the cannon charging. He saw the golden light of Hiyori, the celestial torrent from Yamato. He felt their combined energy. The hope of an entire nation, calling to him. He was the focal point. He was the vessel. He flew into the heart of the golden storm. It did not burn him. It embraced him. The energy of Wano, the life force of the dragon, and his own immense chakra reserves merged, swirling together. He brought his hands together, and the energy began to coalesce, to compress, to spin. It was not a Rasengan. It was something more. It was a sun, a miniature star, born from the will of a nation, burning with an impossibly bright, golden light. It was the size of the castle itself, silent and absolute. He called it, in that moment, the Dawn Sovereign. Unit 734, his sensors overloading, could only state the obvious. Energy levels, impossible. The flagship fired. A beam of pure, annihilating darkness shot toward the city. Naruto met it with his sun. Light and dark collided over the flower capital. For a moment, there was no sound. Only a blinding, overwhelming whiteness. The Dawn Sovereign did not just stop the beam. It consumed it. It washed over the God Slayer fleet, and the advanced shields, the white steel hulls, they didn't explode. They simply unraveled. They dissolved into particles of light. The golden sun then washed over the city below. It did not harm the people. It passed through them, a wave of warmth and hope. But when it touched the army of the corrupted, it was a fire of purification. They didn't scream. They just sighed, a collective release as the darkness was burned away, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. The light faded. Silence. The God Slayer's fleet was gone, save for a few crippled, smoking vessels limping away in retreat. The army of the corrupted had vanished. The siege was broken, but the cost was immense. The city was a ruin, smoke rising from 100 different fires. The silence was the silence of exhaustion and grief. Hiyori collapsed on the balcony, the golden light gone, leaving her as pale as a ghost. Yamato fell to one knee on the wall, her energy completely spent. And Naruto, his power drained to a terrifying emptiness, fell from the sky like a stone, crashing into the castle courtyard below, unmoving. They had won. They had survived. But as the smoke began to clear, a new horror became visible. The sky above Wano was wrong. The clouds were being pulled inward, swirling into a central point of absolute blackness. A form began to coalesce in that void. A being of impossible size, of silent, screaming geometry. It had no face, no eyes, but they could all feel it staring down at them, a gaze of cold, cosmic hunger. The Star Eater, its army destroyed, its plans in ruins, was enraged. And it was done hiding. The true boss had finally entered the arena. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The God of the Void. The silence that followed the victory was deeper and more terrifying than the chaos of the battle. The cheers of the surviving samurai died in their throats, replaced by gasps of horror. They looked up from the ruins of their city, from the bodies of their fallen comrades, and saw their doom made manifest. The thing in the sky was an affront to reason. It was a being of pure, conceptual dread. Calling it a monster felt inadequate. It was a living hole in the fabric of reality, a swirling vortex of non-existence that had taken a vague, star-dusted form. Its size was impossible to gauge, seeming to be both infinitely far away and pressing directly against the sky. Its presence was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that stole the breath and leached the color from the world. The creeping gray of the dead zones was no longer a creeping threat. It was now pouring down from the sky, a visible aura of cosmic decay. The Star Eater was no longer simply influencing the world, it was actively unmaking it. This was the god-level enemy. Not a being of immense power, but power itself. Not a creature of darkness, but the darkness from which all creatures are born and to which all light must return. On the ground, the last remnants of Wano's strength gathered. The surviving samurai, their armor battered and their swords chipped, formed ragged lines in the streets. Naruto's shinobi, emerging from the shadows, their faces grim, took to the rooftops. The civilians, armed with farming tools and kitchen knives, stood beside them. There was no longer a distinction between soldier and citizen. There was only Wano, a single, unified body, bracing for its own extinction. Even the god slayers paused their retreat. On the bridge of their crippled but still functional sub-command vessel, the newly promoted Commander Stellan, a grim-faced woman who had been Kaiden's second, watched the celestial horror on her viewscreen. Her sensors were screaming, her technicians babbling about impossible energy readings and localized spatial warping. Her mission had been to contain a threat to the world's order. She was now staring at a threat to the world itself. "Commander," her helm officer asked, his voice trembling. "Orders." Stellan looked from the impossible creature on the screen to the burning city on the ground. Her orders were to retreat, to report the asset's full capabilities and the entity's manifestation, and to await the arrival of the main fleet and the Seraphim units. But she knew, with a soldier's grim certainty, that by the time the fleet arrived, there would be nothing left to report on. "All remaining ships," she said, her voice cold and clear, her decision made. "Target the entity. Full power to all remaining weapon systems. We're not running. We're buying time." Her mission had changed from containment to a futile, sacrificial last stand. The enemy of her enemy was, for this brief, final moment, her ally. In the castle courtyard, Hiyori and Yamato finally reached Naruto's still form. He was alive, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, but he was utterly drained, his skin pale, his chakra reserves a barren desert. "Naruto." Yamato shook him, her voice rough with panic. "Get up. Look at that thing. We have to fight it." Hiyori placed a calming hand on her shoulder, though her own heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "He cannot, Yamato-san. The last attack, it took everything. He gave the will of all of Wano a shape. It has left him empty." As if hearing them, Naruto's eyes fluttered open. He looked up, past their concerned faces, to the abomination in the sky. He felt no fear. He had looked into the eyes of Kagaya, a being who could unmake dimensions. This was different. Kagaya wanted to rule. This thing just wanted to eat. There was a terrifying simplicity to it. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his body screaming in protest. "It's not a creature of energy," he rasped, his mind already analyzing, strategizing even on the brink of collapse. "It's a creature of void. Blasting it will be like trying to drown a hole. It will just absorb it." He was right. In the sky, the remnants of the God Slayer fleet unleashed a final, desperate volley. Beams of plasma, powerful enough to level mountains, soared into the sky and vanished into the Star Eater's form without a trace, like stones tossed into a bottomless well. A moment later, tendrils of blackness lashed out from the entity, impossibly fast, and the remaining ships were simply gone. Erased. The last, desperate act of the God Slayers had served only to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Naruto staggered to his feet, using Yamato's shoulder for support. He looked at the faces of his wives, at the desperation and defiance warring in their eyes. He looked out at the city, at the people of Wano standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to die for their home. And in that moment, he saw the answer. It was insane. It was probably impossible. It was the only chance they had. "We can't kill it," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "You can't kill a concept. But we can change it. We don't fight the void. We have to fill it." He laid out the plan, his words coming in ragged bursts. It was a desperate, three-pronged strategy that would require each of them to push beyond the very limits of their being. Yamato, he said, his gaze locking with hers. You're the shield. Your power is the life of this land, the celestial dragon's gift. It's the opposite of that thing. You have to project your power, not as an attack, but as a barrier. A wall of life. It won't stop it, but it might slow down the decay. It will buy us the seconds we need. Hiyori, he turned to her, his voice softening. You are the anchor. You did it once, you have to do it again. Be the heart. Connect to everyone, not just in the city, but the whole country. All of it, their memories, their hopes, their love, their pain. Gather it all. Gather the soul of Wano. You will be the conduit that feeds the fire. And you? Hiyori asked, her voice trembling as she understood the terrible weight of what he was asking. A small, weary smile touched Naruto's lips. I'm the blade. I'm the vessel. You will pour the soul of this nation into me. And I'm going to try and give a god indigestion. Before the final battle, a single figure approached the castle. It was Commander Stellan, the God Slayer. She had used an emergency teleportation device to abandon her doomed ship just before it was erased. She stood before Naruto, her white uniform singed, her face streaked with soot. Her professional composure shattered, leaving only the grim visage of a soldier facing the end. Our mission was to prevent a deity-level entity from manifesting, she said, her voice flat, devoid of its earlier animosity. We have failed. She looked at the thing in the sky, then back at Naruto. We feared you. We feared beings of your power because our history is full of worlds destroyed by them. We believed that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the only way to maintain order was to ensure no individual ever held such power. Order is just another word for control, Naruto replied quietly. Perhaps, Stellan conceded, a flicker of something, grudging respect, in her eyes. But now, the alternative is annihilation. Our protocols have a final contingency. The Genesis Protocol. In the event of an unavoidable extinction-level event, all data on the nature of the threat is to be preserved and passed on at all costs. She held out a small, metallic data chip. This contains everything we know about this entity, our analysis of your abilities, our weapon schematics. It's not much, but if you fail, maybe the next world will stand a chance. It was a surrender, an admission that their ideology, their technology, their precious order, had all been rendered meaningless. Naruto took the chip. It was a gesture of trust in a future he probably wouldn't live to see. We won't fail, he said, not as a boast, but as a simple statement of intent. Stellan gave a single, curt nod. She drew her sidearm. My fight is over. Yours is just beginning. I will protect the regent while she performs her role. A god slayer, volunteering to protect one of the very anomalies she had been sent to destroy. The world was indeed ending. The final battle was a war fought on a spiritual plane. Yamato was the first to act. She stood on the highest tower of the castle, and she let go. She unleashed her power not as a focused blast, but as an expanding wave of pure life. A vibrant, turquoise aura exploded from her. A dome of crackling, vital energy that spread over the entire city. Where it passed, the creeping gray of the Star Eater's influence halted, the colors of the world growing a little brighter. It was a breathtaking sight, a shield of life against a sky of death. But the strain was immense. The veins on her temples stood out, and a trickle of blood ran from her nose. She was holding back the apocalypse with sheer, stubborn will. Hiyori sat in the center of the courtyard, Commander Stellan standing guard over her. She touched the ground, and she reached out with her soul. She became a nexus, a focal point for the spirit of Wano. She felt it all. The fierce pride of the samurai, the quiet resilience of the farmers, the fierce love of a mother for her child, He bitter grief of a man for his fallen brother. Memories, dreams, songs, stories, the entire tapestry of a nation's history and heart flowed into her. She wept, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming beauty and pain of it all. A column of pure, golden light, the collective soul of her people, erupted from her and shot into the sky. Naruto flew to meet it. He plunged into the torrent of golden energy, and he let it fill him. It was more intense than when he'd formed the Dawn Sovereign. This wasn't just their fighting spirit, it was everything. He felt their history, their joy, their sorrow. He felt the weight of 1,000 generations. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki. He was the living embodiment of Wano. His form began to change. His body shone with a golden light so bright it was impossible to look at. The truth-seeking orbs behind him multiplied, spinning into a complex, geometric halo. He was ascending, transcending, becoming something new, a fusion of shinobi power and a nation's soul. He flew toward the Star Eater. As he approached, the void spoke in his mind. It did not use words. It showed him images, concepts. It showed him the heat death of the universe, the inevitable decay of all things. It showed him galaxies crumbling to dust. It told him that his struggle was meaningless, a brief, insignificant flicker of warmth against an eternity of cold, empty silence. It was the ultimate argument of despair. You were right, Naruto sent back, his own thoughts a golden sun against the crushing blackness. All things end, but that is what gives them meaning. A story isn't beautiful because it is endless, but because it is told. He reached the epicenter of the void. And he unleashed his final attack. It was not a punch, not a blast of energy. He held his hands out. And from them poured the golden light, the soul of Wano. He did not try to destroy the void. He poured the stories, the memories, the love, the grief, into it. He poured Hiyori's song, Yamato's laughter, Kunamon's loyalty. The hope of a child, the memory of a first kiss, the taste of ramen on a cold night. He poured life into the heart of death. The Star Eater recoiled, not in pain, but in confusion. It was a being of pure negation, of subtraction. It did not know how to process addition. The golden energy did not destroy the void, it gave it substance. It gave the emptiness a memory. It gave the darkness a shape. The result was a paradox, a cosmic alchemy that defied the laws of physics. The swirling vortex of blackness began to shrink, to condense, to solidify. The void was not being filled, it was being transformed. With a final, silent pulse that was felt in the soul of every living thing on the island, the transformation was complete. The massive, terrifying hole in the sky was gone. In its place, burning with a gentle, steady, golden white light, was a new star. It was not a sun. It was a focal point of pure, positive energy, a scar of creation where a wound of destruction had once been. The battle was over. The god of the void had been dethroned, not by being killed, but by being taught what it meant to live. As the new star, the star of Wano, cast its first, gentle rays over the ravaged city, Naruto's transcendent form faded. The golden light receded, leaving only the man. He was utterly, profoundly empty. He had poured everything, his chakra, his life force, the very essence of the nation he had embraced, into that final, impossible act. He fell from the sky, his consciousness fading, his last thought not of victory, but of the two women who had been his anchors, his partners, his home. His body plummeted toward the broken castle below. Hiyori and Yamato, their own strength spent, could only watch, their tear-filled eyes reflecting the light of the new star he had just created. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Dawn of a New Shogun. Time, for Naruto, became a series of disconnected, dream-like fragments. He was floating in a warm, quiet ocean. He heard the soft, melodic notes of a shamisen, a song that felt like both a lament and a lullaby. He felt a gentle, impossibly strong hand grip his own, refusing to let go. He smelled the sharp, clean scent of medicinal herbs and the faint, lingering fragrance of cherry blossoms. He was adrift, but he was not lost. He was anchored. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was not a ceiling, but a face. Hiyori was sitting by his futon, her expression soft with a weariness that went bone deep, but her eyes were clear and bright. She was humming the tune she had been playing, a simple, peaceful melody. He tried to speak, but his throat was a desert, and only a dry rasp emerged. She immediately held a cup of cool water to his lips, her touch gentle and steady. "Welcome back, Naruto-san," she said, her voice a soft murmur. A single, perfect tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. "We were worried." He looked around. He was in his own chambers in the castle, the painted screens now backlit by the warm glow of a morning sun. He could feel the life in his own limbs, a slow, sluggish trickle where a raging river had once been. He reached for his chakra, for the warmth of the sage mode. For anything. There was a profound, echoing silence. He was not just empty. He was reset, a slate wiped clean. The final act of creation had cost him nearly everything. A loud, ungraceful snore from the other side of the room broke the quiet intimacy. Yamato was slumped in a large armchair, her head thrown back, her kanabo resting against the wall beside her. She was covered in bandages. Her face bruised, but she looked more peaceful in her sleep than he had ever seen her awake. Even in exhaustion, she had refused to leave his side. How long? He managed to ask, his voice a hoarse whisper. A month, Hiyori replied, dabbing his brow with a cool cloth. You have been sleeping for a month. Yamato-san has barely left this room. She claimed she was guarding you from ambitious pillows. A small, genuine smile graced her lips. A month. He had been gone for a month, floating in that quiet ocean while the world moved on. He looked at Hiyori, truly looked at her. The weight she carried seemed lighter. The constant tension in her shoulders was gone. Wano, he asked, the single word encompassing 100 questions. Is healing, she said, her eyes shining. The dead fields, the gray is receding. Slowly, patches of green have begun to return. And the sleepers, 2 days ago, the first of them woke up. The star of Wano, the thing he had created, was not just a symbol. It was a font of positive, life-affirming energy. It was a slow, gentle counter-agent to the Star Eater's poison, a sun that nurtured the land back to health. The following weeks were a strange, quiet time of recovery for all of them. Naruto's power returned, but it was a slow, arduous process. He had to learn to walk again, his muscles atrophied. He had to retrain his chakra pathways, meditating for hours just to mold a tiny spark of energy. It was humbling. For the first time since he was a child, he was not a demigod, not a weapon. He was just a man. And in that vulnerability, he found a new kind of strength. He was not alone in his recovery. The entire country was engaged in the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding. But this time, it was different. The destruction had not been a source of division, but a forge of unity. The clan rivalries, the old grudges, the political squabbles, they had all been burned away in the fires of the siege, rendered meaningless by the shared, terrifying glimpse into the void. Samurai of the Shimotsuki clan worked shoulder to shoulder with farmers from Udon to clear rubble. Merchants from the capital sent wagonloads of free supplies to the outer provinces. The old hierarchies had crumbled, replaced by a simple, profound sense of community. They were all just people of Wano, survivors of the apocalypse. Momonosuke, the boy shogun, stepped into his new role with a maturity that belied his years. He was no longer just Oden's son, a symbol of a lost past. He was the leader who had stood with his people, who had watched the battle from the castle walls and refused to hide. He toured the country, not as a ruler inspecting his domain, but as a young man helping to rebuild his home, his own small hands helping to lay the new foundation stones of the capital. The most shocking change, however, came from the sea. A week after the battle, a single, unassuming ship from the world government arrived. It did not carry soldiers, but diplomats and engineers. Led by a chastened Commander Stellan, she brought an official apology and an unconditional offer of aid. The data chip Naruto had been given, combined with the energy readings from the final battle, had sent a shockwave through the highest echelons of the world government. They had been wrong. Their rigid doctrine of control had nearly cost them the world. Wano, under its new leadership, had succeeded where their entire military might would have failed. Cautiously, Hiyori accepted. The borders of Wano began to open, not in surrender, but on their own terms. They accepted technological aid to rebuild their infrastructure, and in return, they shared their story, their culture, their unbending will. Wano was no longer an isolated mystery. It was becoming a beacon. As Naruto's strength returned, so too did the rhythm of his new life. His relationship with Hiyori and Yamato, forged in crisis, now settled into a comfortable, deeply felt reality. The political marriage had become a genuine partnership, a multifaceted love built on a foundation of profound, mutual respect. His moments with Hiyori were ones of quiet understanding. They would walk through the newly planted castle gardens, discussing the slow, steady progress of the rebuilding. She was the architect of the new Wano, her wisdom and grace guiding the nation's rebirth. He was her confidant, her sounding board. The one person who understood the immense weight she carried. Theirs was a love that was calm, deep, and as steady as the earth itself. She had healed the sorrow in him, and he had given her the strength to finally be herself. His time with Yamato was a whirlwind of joyous energy. As soon as he could stand, she had challenged him to a spar. It was a short, clumsy affair that ended with both of them laughing on the ground, but it was a celebration of their shared survival, of the simple joy of being alive. She was the protector of the new Wano, her boundless strength now a source of comfort rather than fear. She patrolled the coasts, not as a wild force, but as a guardian deity, her presence a promise that no enemy would ever threaten her home again. Theirs was a love of passion, adventure, and a shared, rebellious spirit. She had reminded him of the exhilarating freedom of being strong, and he had shown her that a bond was not always a chain. They were a family, strange, unconventional, and forged in the crucible of an apocalypse, but a family nonetheless. They had found a balance, a harmony that worked for them, a reflection of the new, more open-minded Wano they were building. Several months later, on the anniversary of the siege, the new flower capital was officially unveiled. It was more beautiful than before, the new architecture blending seamlessly with the old. A testament to both tradition and progress. In the center of the main square, where Hiyori had fought her own desperate battle, a new statue had been erected. It was not of a warrior or a shogun. It was a simple, elegant carving of 3 intertwined pillars, representing the 3 of them, supporting a single, radiant star. The final scene of the day took place on a cliff overlooking the capital, a favorite spot of Naruto's. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the reborn city. Naruto stood there, Hiyori on his right, Yamato on his left. The wind was gentle, carrying the distant sounds of celebration and the scent of the sea. Hiyori leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "A new dawn." "Nah," Yamato said, nudging him with her elbow, a wide grin on her face. "A new adventure." Naruto looked at them, at the deep, quiet love in Hiyori's eyes, at the fierce, unshakable loyalty in Yamato's. He looked down at the city, a place he had come to by accident. A place that had become his home. He looked up at the sky, where the star of Wano was just beginning to make its appearance, a gentle, golden sentinel in the twilight. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki of the Hidden Leaf, the lonely Jinchuriki, the child of prophecy. He was Naruto of Wano, a husband, a protector, a pillar of a new world. He hadn't found a way back to his old home, and for the first time, he realized he didn't want to. He was already there. 2 small figures ran up to them, their laughter like wind chimes. A boy with bright, blonde hair and small, proud horns, and a girl with Hiyori's dark, graceful hair and Naruto's impossible blue eyes. They tackled his legs, and he reached down, ruffling their hair. He had lost a world. He had lost his oldest friend. But here, standing between a princess and an oni, with his children's laughter in his ears and a new star in the sky, he had found something he had been searching for his entire life. Peace. The dawn had broken over Wano. And it was dazzling. Chapter 10 End.